Starting a new stream now. Lucky. Yeah, it's alright. I mean, I'm just learning stuff. I did it so if anybody else wants to learn or they can guide me. That is the exact reason why I did this, you know? That is my main reason for doing this actually. And if it lags, it lags. Who cares? Well, I'm starting now. Thank you for liking the stream again, also I like that. Though this is the platform on which I stream, but still, YouTube sucks in multi-streaming.
Oriented programming concepts, things like classes and objects, inheritance, all that fun stuff. If you're new to programming or you just want to try and pick up C#, then this course has something for you. I'm really excited to be bringing you guys C# tutorials. It's an awesome language and there are literally thousands of things you can do with it. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's go into the course and start learning some C#.
You already have the setup.
In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to install and get everything set up to start programming in C#. Now, in order to start programming in C#, we're actually just going to need one thing, which is going to be a program called Visual Studio Community. And this is basically a program that will allow us to write our C# programs. And this is what's called an integrated development environment. And a lot of times you'll hear people call those IDEs. It's essentially just a special program where we can write and
this
work
is, by the way, made by
code. So in this case, this is an IDE that will allow us to work with C# programming language.
So yeah, I'm using those videos to learn
just
stuff.
visualstudio.com/vs/community. And this is the website where we can go to download this. You'll see over here there's an option to download on Windows, and then there's also an option to download on Mac over here. So you can just click whichever one you need. In my case, I'm on a Windows, so I'm just going to go ahead and click the one for Windows. So I'll click this, and that's to start downloading in. We should get an installer that we can use to install Visual Studio. When it loads up, you'll see that we have what we need. Over 100 applications. The top and back. All right into Visual Studio. And you'll see over here, it's asking me to sign in. You don't actually have to sign in, so I'm just going to click not now, maybe later. And then over here, we have a bunch of options. You'll see down here there's this drop down. I'm just going to click general, so just make sure it's on general, and then we can pick whatever style we want to have. We can just go with the basics, so I'll just stick with blue, and then I'm going to starting page. I'm just going to click out of this. We don't need to have this up here, and I'm going to go over here, and we're just going to click file, and I'm going to click new project. So we want to start a new project, and this is basically going to allow us to write our applications. So, and actually down here we could give this a name, so I'm just going to call this draft, and then we click OK. And actually down here we could give this a name, so I'm just going to call this draft, and then we could store it wherever we wanted to store it. So when this loads up, you'll see that we now have this
console app, right? There's that. See, it's working properly on the vertical part, but it's running trash on the horizontal stream. That's dumb. Okay, let's again start.
File open, and this is just called program.cs, and that .cs extension stands for C#. And then down here we have a basic program. So this is essentially a very simple program, and it's sort of like the template for a program. And don't worry too much about what all this stuff is. In the next video, I'm going to talk you guys through what all this stuff is, what it means, and we'll actually write our first program. But for now, we have everything set up, so we're ready to go and ready to get started with C# development. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to write your first C# program. We're also just going to talk in general about what a program is. So we're going to look at the different instructions that we can give to the computer and how those instructions are going to play out and allow us to write applications. So over here, we basically just have our basic project set up, and I kind of went over how to do this in the last tutorial. And we're basically given this little text file, and this is a C# file. So it's called program.cs, and that CS extension stands for C#. You'll also notice over here in our Solution Explorer, we have a bunch of different stuff here. So I called my project draft, and then over here I have like this little properties thing, this references thing. Really all we need to worry about over here, and I know there's a lot of stuff over here, is this guy right here, program.cs. That is the C# file that we're going to be programming in. That's the file we're going to be using for this course. And this is really all you need to worry about over here. And you'll see that this is actually populated with some code, with some text by default. You'll see up here we have all of these little commands. It just says using system collections, all this stuff. Essentially what this is doing is it's just configuring the file, so you don't really have to worry too much about what this stuff is up here. Just make sure that you leave it alone, don't touch it. But basically there's some things that we're gonna have to use with C#, and up here we can specify that we want to use them. So there's these things called system, and there's all these different things that we can use inside of there. But for the most part, you can just kind of leave this alone for now. We'll talk more about what this is later in the course, but for now you don't have to worry about it too much. Down here you'll see this says namespace draft. You'll notice that this is actually the same name as the project that we're using, and essentially that's what this is saying. It's saying that we're in the draft project, and actually this is doing some more stuff. Again, we're gonna C#, so our structure C#. We have templates, we can store it wherever we wanted to store it. So when this loads up, you'll see that we now have this file open, and this is just called, so make sure you just click console app and we should be good. So I'm just gonna click OK, and actually down here we could give this a name. So when this loads up, you'll see that we now have this file open, and this is just called program.cs, and that .cs extension stands for C#. And then down here we have a basic program. So this is essentially a very simple program, and it's sort of like the template for a program. And don't worry too much about what all this stuff is. In the next video, I'm going to...
I don't really have that.
Once upon a time, we were both happy. Everything was fine, and suddenly it leave. I was left behind, broken in pieces. Then you'd reappear. Sometimes we all feel a little afraid. We don't put our emotions on display. But I've gotta be strong. I don't wanna know if you feel it too. Your chances are gone.
Now I just need you to trust me that but on the program. inside of there. But for the most part, you can just kind of leave this alone for now. We'll talk more about what this is later in the course, but for now you don't have to worry about it too much. Down here you'll see this says namespace draft. You'll notice that this is actually the same name as the project that we're using, and essentially that's what this is saying. It's saying that we're in the draft project, and actually this is doing some more stuff. Again, we're going to talk more about namespaces later in the course, so you don't really have to worry about that too much. And really, you know, all this stuff up here you can kind of just leave alone. You don't have to worry about that in the beginning. And down here we have these two curly brackets, and these two curly brackets essentially just signify that our program is starting. So inside of these curly brackets we can actually write some code and the computer will be able to execute that code. Here we have this keyword class, and it's called program. Now a class is essentially just a container where we can store a bunch of code. So inside of a class we can write all of the code for our program and it'll be able to be executed. So again, we're going to talk more about classes as we go on through this course, but for now just know that a class is essentially just a container where we can put code. Down here we have this line of code here. It says static void main, and this is actually what's called a method or a function. Again, we're going to talk more about methods and functions later in the course, but this is sort of just like another container where we can put code. And this is a very important container because this container is where we can put all the code that we want our program to execute. So this main method or this main function, any code that we put inside of here, in other words, any code that we put inside of these open and closed curly brackets is actually going to get executed by our computer. So whatever code I want my program to have, I need to put it inside of this main method. So inside of these open and closed curly brackets. Now, I understand that a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense right now, and to be perfectly honest with you, we kind of have to just set our program up this way in order for it to work. It doesn't matter if this stuff doesn't make sense. Obviously you're not going to understand what all this stuff is, but just know that that's totally fine. As a beginner, you're not expected to know any of that. You're not going to know any of that. Through this course though, I'm going to be teaching you guys all of this stuff. So by the end of the course, we'll understand what all this stuff is doing, why it's important, why it's there. But for now, I just need you to trust me that we need to have everything set up like this in order for our programs to run. And any code that we're going to write inside of our C# file that we want to execute, I want to put in between these two curly brackets inside of this main block. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about the structure a little bit, we've talked about some of the stuff that we needed to know, what I want to do is actually write our first line of code. So we're going to go ahead and write a line of code which is going to print something out onto the screen. So one of the things that is really useful to do when writing a program is to print out information. And the most basic instruction that we can give the computer is basically telling it to print something out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Down here, we're going to write our first line of code. So I'm just going to say console with a capital C dot write line. And then I'm going to make an open and closed parentheses, and I'm going to make a semicolon. Now, inside of these open and closed parentheses, I'm going to make an open and closed quotation mark, and I'm just going to type out hello world. So essentially what we're doing here is we're telling C# that we want to write this text out onto the screen. So let's kind of look through this line of code. I'm saying console.writeLine, and this is an instruction. So essentially I'm telling C# that I want to write a line out onto the console. And as you'll see in a second, the console is basically just a little window where we can see the output of our program. I'm saying console.writeLine, and inside of these parentheses, I'm specifying what I want to write out onto the console or out onto the screen. And I'm basically just saying hello world, and then over here I'm putting this semicolon. Now, whenever we're writing a line of code in C#, whenever you're done writing that line of code, you always need to end it with a semicolon. So for the most part, whenever you write an instruction, whenever you write a line of code, you're going to end it with a semicolon, and that's very important. And as a beginner, you're going to forget to put the semicolon. Trust me, everybody does, but eventually you'll just kind of get used to putting it in there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and now we're going to actually execute this program. So when I say execute the program, essentially...
Let's do it first. ये था, फिर उसके बाद क्या था?
And I've been chillin', watching the ocean with you. Baby up with a slow motion crew. And we up in our growlings when people change, but not us. And we just chillin', kicking it, kissed by the sun. Could be soaked to the skin in the mall soon. I know she got the good vibes when seasons change, but we're the same. Even if I lost all my money, the zero runs deep, honey. And I don't need to speak a single word, 'cause you got me holding. Even if my jokes aren't funny, my tongue tied up on it. And I don't need to speak a single word, 'cause you got me
What I'm doing is I'm telling the computer to go through and carry out all of the instructions that we specify. In our program right now, we only really have one instruction, which is telling the computer to write a line out onto the console. I'm gonna come up here and you'll see there's this start button. So this is gonna be our best friend throughout the course. Anytime I wanna run my program, I'm gonna go ahead and click this start button. So I'm just gonna click it. And when I click this start button, my program is actually going to run. And if you look there, you'll see that a black window popped up for just a second. I'm continuing to run it. Essentially what's happening is C# is printing out the line hello world onto a little console window that's popping up. But the problem is, if you look, when I click this start button, my program is actually going to run. And if you look there, you'll see that a black window popped up for just a second. I'm continuing to run it. Essentially what's happening is C# is printing out the line hello world onto a little console window that's popping up. But the problem is that our program is printing that out and then the program is terminating, so that window is going away. In order to keep that window up so we can see what's going on, I'm going to type out another line of code. I'm just going to type console.readline. And basically what this line of code is going to do is it's going to keep that little console window up until I enter in a line of text. So now when I run my program, until what this line of code is going to do, we can see what's going on. So that problem is hello world onto a little console window that's popping up. But the problem is that our program is printing that out and then the program is terminating, so that window is going away. In order to keep that window up so we can see what's going on, I'm going to type out another line of code. I'm just going to type console.readline. And basically what this line of code is going to do is it's going to keep that little console window up until I enter in a line of text. So now when I run my program, you guys will see that this little black window up here appears and then it stays open. So before it was kind of flashing up and then disappearing, but now it's going to stay open. And you'll see we're printing out hello world onto the screen. Now, if I click the enter key, so I'm just going to click enter, this window is going to go away. So anytime I click enter, that basically tells our program that we're done executing it, so we want it to go away.
Just a second.
And that's basically all we have to do. So I can write out instructions in here. I can write out
हाँ बोलो 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 हाँ पता बच्चा बच्चे क्या बंद करो मैं मेन मोटिव नहीं रिस्पेक्ट करता हूँ अच्छा कैसे
lines of code. I can
Okay,
press the
let's
start
start.
button, and then I'm basically executing all of those lines of code. And then obviously to get out of this, like I said, you can just like type a space and type enter, or you can really type anything and just hit enter, and then the program will terminate. This is sort of our first C# instruction. And like I said, console.writeLine basically just writes a line of text out onto the screen. And then we can include this console.readLine instruction in order to keep that window up so we can see what we're printing out. Now that we know how to print out something onto the screen, I want to show you guys how we can draw a little shape. So I'm actually going to get rid of this, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this WriteLine piece of code, and I'm going to paste it a few times down here. So we're actually going to use this line of code to draw out a shape onto the screen. So down here I'm going to create like a /, and then up here we'll create one, and I'm going to keep creating them in this little pyramid structure. So now you can see I have like a little pyramid, and then I'm gonna make vertical bars going all the way down. So essentially we're drawing out like a little right triangle. And actually, you know, I'm gonna put underscores here so it's a little more obvious. So you can see I'm saying console.writeLine, and in each one of these instructions, I'm telling the computer to write out a different line. So over here, we're writing out like the tip of the triangle. Over here, we're writing out the middle part of the triangle, and then the base of the triangle. So now let's go ahead and run this program, and you'll see over here we're actually able to print out this entire triangle. So just by using that one instruction, that console.writeLine instruction, I was actually able to draw out an entire shape onto the screen. So now I'm going to go ahead and exit off of this, and you'll see down here how easy it was for us to write this program. Now, essentially what happens is when I click that start button, C# is going to go into my program. It's going to find this block of code right here, main. It's going to go inside of these curly brackets, and it's going to execute each instruction. In other words, each line of code one after the other. So it's going to start with this first line of code, and it's basically going to say, okay, what does the user want me to do? They want me to write a line out onto the console, and they want me to write this text. So it's going to go ahead and write that out onto the console. Then when it's done with this instruction, it's going to come down here and go to this second instruction. It's going to do the same thing. It'll execute that instruction, and then it'll go down here, execute this one, and execute this one. So essentially what C# does is it executes all of the lines of code, all of the instructions that we give it in order. And one of the things you're going to learn is that when we're programming, the order matters. So the order in which you write these lines of code actually matters a lot. So if I was to take this instruction over here and I was to paste it up here in the top, now this is going to change the way that the shape looks. So instead of having that normal triangle, you can see we have this kind of like funky looking shape where the base is up at the top. And that's because we changed the order of the program. Now essentially all a program is just a set of instructions specified in a particular order. That's it. And as we go through this course, and as you learn more about
How do you
C#,
make a
you're going to
vertical
find
bar?
more and more complex instructions that you can use. So the more complex instructions you're able to give the computer, and the better you're able to organize them and order them, the more powerful your programs are going to become. So obviously we only really know two instructions. We know this console.writeLine, which prints something out, and console.readLine, which basically pauses the screen until we enter something. But just with these two lines of code, we were
Okay.
actually able to draw out an entire shape onto the screen, and that was pretty cool. The takeaways from this tutorial is that a program is essentially just a set of instructions that the computer is going to follow. The order of those instructions matter, and in C#, the instructions that are going to get executed by the computer are going to be inside of these open and
You guys are not able to watch that, right?
Pain is seeping out, demons taking center stage. Spirits in
Oh,
the
wait.
crowd, are you not entertained? This world has its way of bringing me to my knees.
Closed curly brackets in this main block of code. And that's sort of the bare basics of writing a C# program. We were able to print something out onto the screen, we were able to pause that little console until we told it we were done, and now we can kind of go forward and start learning more and more complex instructions and more complex ways to build our programs. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about variables in C#. Now, a lot of times when we're writing programs in C#, we're going to be dealing with a bunch of different data. So there's going to be all sorts of information, all sorts of data values in our programs. And a lot of times that information, those data values, can be kind of hard to keep track of and manage. So in C# we have a special container called a variable. And a variable is basically just a container where we can store some of that information. So I could store a piece of data or a piece of information that I want to keep track of and manage in my programs inside of a variable. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys what variables are, why they're useful, and we'll look at kind of how we can work with them in our C# programs. So down here, I have written out this very basic program. It's basically just writing out a bunch of lines of text. It says, there once was a man named George. He was 70 years old. He really liked the name George, but didn't like being 70. So this is basically just a program that I wrote which prints out a little story onto the screen. So if I was to run this program, you'll see that we get this story. It says there once was a man named George, he was 70, etc. So I'm able to print out this story onto the screen. So this is a perfectly functional program. We've actually written a program which prints out a story, right? But let's say that I'm looking at my story and I'm thinking to myself, I think I want to change the character's name. Well, let's say instead of having the character be named George, I want to change his name to John. Well, I can just come up here, I can search through my story and find every place where I'm mentioning the character's name, and I can change it to
How
John.
have you been?
Cool.
Welcome
So now-
back.
Like a scene from a movie.
PG ની exam પર હતા क्या આપવાની છે?
Let's make it juicy. Let's make it juicy.
Now my story is updated. I went through, I
How was your
manually
day?
changed the name to John, and everything works. But let's say I'm looking at it again and I'm thinking, maybe I want to try to appeal to a younger audience. So instead of
Oh, I
having the
see, I
character
see.
be 70,
Jordan.
why don't we have the character be like 35? So once again, I can just go through, I can look through, and every time they mention the character's age, I can just change it to 35. Here's the next one. Cool. So I basically went through and I found out every place where the character's name was mentioned, and I changed it to 35. Here's the problem though. In order to make those changes, in order to modify the character's name and the character's age, I had to go through and manually change it at every place inside of my program. So every place where the character's name was mentioned and the character's age was mentioned, I had to go in and manually change it. Now, this is fine with a story that only has 4 lines, but imagine if this story had hundreds of lines and the character's name was mentioned like 100 times, or their age was mentioned 100 times. Imagine then if you wanted to change the character's name, or imagine even if you just wanted to keep track of and
Actually serious
manage the
કારણ
character's
કે
name.
સ્ટ્રીમર વોટના અંદર મારે ટ્વિચને યુટ્યુબના કમાન્ડમાં કન્વર્ટ કરવું છે ને તો હું એક જગ્યાએ અટકાઈ ગયો છું. તો આઈ થોટ કે વાય નોટ જસ્ટ લર્ન ઇટ, જેટલું લર્ન કરાય ક્રેશ કોર્સની છે. એ તો આ વેરિયેબલ્સ ને એ બધાનો મને આઈડિયા છે કે કઈ રીતે શું છે. એટલે હા લાગે આમ તો, બટ it's sort of an extra thing which you have beyond your actual professional scope. જે રીતે ભલે MBBS બટ એને આ વસ્તુ પણ આવડે છે કરતા. તો આઈ ગેસ ફોરેન કન્ટ્રીઝમાં તને એનું ક્રેડિટ વધારે મળે એના લીધે, મે બી, નોટ શ્યોર. બટ એવું એ લોકો જોતા હોય કે તમે બીજી સ્કિલ્સ શું છે બિસાઇડ્સ યોર પર્સનલ પ્રોફેશન. સો યા હા, બટ ભાઈ તારે અત્યારે મહિનામાં આવી રહી હશે ને નીટ, એટલે યોર વિશ. આ 4 કલાકનો વિડીયો છે એકચ્યુઅલી.
it would be extremely difficult. So the more lines in this story that I write, the harder it becomes for me to manage the character's name and the character's age. And these are two good examples of pieces of information in our program. In order to make a situation like this a lot easier, we actually have something in C# called a variable. And a variable is basically just a container where I can store a specific data value. And then when I want to use that data value, instead of having to actually like type it out and type out what it is, I can just refer to the variable's name. So I'm going to show you guys how we can create variables and how we can keep track of and manage the different data in our programs, like the character's name and the character's age. So up here above my story, I'm actually going to start creating a variable. And the way that we can create a variable is by giving C# some information. So this is going to be a line of code, and the first piece of information that I want to give to C# is going to be the type of data that I want the variable to be able to store. So remember, variables are just containers that we can store values inside of. And different containers can store different types of information. Some containers can store text, others can store numbers, others can store like other values like true or false values. We're going to go ahead and create a variable that's going to store the character's name. So I want to create a variable that can store text because the character's name is text. And we can do that by creating a string. So a string is essentially just like a string of characters, and it's basically just plain text. So I'm going to go ahead and tell C# that I want to create a string variable. So I'm just going to type out string. And then what I need to do is give this variable a name. So remember, these are containers. And generally, when we're naming a variable, we want to name it according to what's going to be stored inside of it. That way we can identify what's in the variable. I'm just going to call this character name. And you'll notice here that I'm separating these words so the second word has a capital letter. All right, so I created my variable, and it's going to store a string, which is just plain text, and then I'm going to set it equal to something. So I'm going to say character name is equal to, and now I'm going to give this a value. So I'm going to give this a value that's plain text. I'm going to make an open and closed quotation mark, and then whenever I write a line of code, I always want to end it off with a semicolon, just like that. All right, now inside of these quotation marks, I can write out the string of characters or the string of text that I want to store inside of the character name variable. So we're just going to store the character's name, which is John. So I can just type out John up there. In addition to creating a variable to store the character's name, I also want to create another variable to store the character's age. So let's go ahead and do that. Now the character's age is actually going to be a number, right? So the character's age is a number. It's not really plain text like this. And if we want to create a variable to store a number, we can create a variable called an integer variable. So int stands for integer. And an integer is basically just a whole number. So a number that doesn't have decimal points. And I'm just going to go ahead and name this character age. So again, giving it a name. And I want to show you guys another way that we can create these variables. So in addition to saying like string character name is equal to John, I could also just say int character age. I could put a semicolon here, and then I could come down here and give this a value. So I could say like character age is equal to, and now we can give this a value. So we said 35. And you'll notice that when I give this a number value, I don't need these quotation marks. You only need the quotation marks with a string. So these are two different ways that I can create a variable, and they're doing exactly the same thing. Up here, I'm just saying string character name, and I'm giving it a value right away. Over here, I'm doing what's called declaring the variable. I'm basically saying that we're going to have a variable called character age. I'm not giving it a value right away. And then down here, I'm assigning it a value of 35. So these two, this guy and this guy up here, are doing exactly the same thing. So now that we have these variables, in other words, now that we have containers where we can store the different values or the different pieces of data that we're going to work with in our programs, I want to actually use those variables inside of our story. So I'm going to show you guys how, in addition to printing out this plain text, I can actually print out the value that's stored inside of the variable. So over here, you'll notice that I'm typing out there once was a man named John. But I don't want to have to type out John anymore. I just want to be able to refer to that variable. So what I can do is I can actually get rid of this, and I'm going to come outside of these quotation marks, and over here I'm going to put a plus sign. And this plus sign basically means I want to like append some text, or I want to append a value onto the end of this text over here. And what I want to do is just put the name of the variable. So I'm just going to type out character name. And I'm going to be there once was a man named John. In addition to printing out this plain user, the variable is giving it a value of 35. So these two, this guy and this guy up here, are doing exactly the same thing. So now that we have these variables, in other words, now that we have containers where we can store the different values or the different pieces of data that we're going to work with in our programs, I want to actually use those variables inside of our story. So I'm going to show you guys how, in addition to printing out this plain text, I can actually print out the value that's stored inside of the variable. So over here, you'll notice that I'm typing out there once was a man named John. But I don't want to have to type out John anymore. I just want to be able to refer to that variable. So what I can do is I can actually get rid of this, and I'm going to come outside of these quotation marks, and over here I'm going to put a plus sign. And this plus sign basically means I want to like append some text, or I want to append a value onto the end of this text over here. And what I want to do is just put the name of the variable. So I'm just going to type out character name. And what this is going to do is it's going to print out there once was a man named, and then a space, and then it's going to print out the value that's stored inside of the character name variable. So it's going to print out John. So let me demonstrate that. Let's go ahead and run this program, and you'll see over here we're still printing out there once was a man named John.
Same stuff.
Except I didn't have to physically type out John down here. All I did was use this plus sign and essentially just append on, or people will call this concatenate on, the value that was stored inside the character name variable. And this is extremely useful. So I can do the same thing down here with this other occurrence of the character's name. I can just say character name. And now over here it's going to do the same thing. It's going to say he really liked the name, and then whatever the value that's stored inside of this character name variable. We can do the same thing for the age. So over here you'll notice that I have the age is 35.
I mean,
but remember, we created this variable up here to store that. So what I can do,
I mean, I can go on 2x, but this is code. तो कोड को समझने में, वो दिमाग में प्रोसेस करने का टाइम लगता है. नहीं तो पण एक जोक है जे आ तो he is still speaking at a very good level, you know, at a very good speed, normal speed. But આજે મેરોના ને એના લેક્ચર્સ હોય એમાં એ લોકો એટલું ધીમું બોલે ને, you will be like, what's happening? Let us just type this code. Music background માં આમ normal લાગે છે ને કે આમ not too overpowering.
Swimpert.
Okay.
do is I can actually get rid of this, and I'm actually going to make two open and close quotation marks here, and I'm going to make two plus signs, and then in between here I'm going to type out character age. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm telling this right line instruction
that's
that I
what
want
I
to
did,
print out he was with a space, and then I want to add in the value that's stored inside of the character age variable, which is going to be 35, and then I want to add into that years old. So basically what we're doing here is called concatenating a string. I'm saying I want to type this out, plus I want to type the value that's in here, plus I want to print out this stuff over there. And then finally we can do the same thing down here. So I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm just gonna type in character age. So I've replaced every occurrence of the character's name and the character's age with these variables. So now let's go ahead and run our program. I'm just gonna click this start button, and you'll see over here
Okay,
we're
okay,
printing out the same exact story as
bye-bye.
before.
Have a
It
good
says
one.
there once was a man named John. He was 35, he liked the name John, and 35. So I essentially just replaced John and 35 with the variables that are storing them. Now, what's cool about these variables is if I wanted to, for example, modify the character's name or the character's age, I can just modify it up here. So let's say we wanted to change the character's name to Tom, and we wanted to make him like 25. Well, now I only have to modify those two values. I only have to update them in one spot, and it's gonna update throughout my entire story. So now the character's name is Tom, and he's 25 throughout the entire story. And the variables just make it a lot easier for us to keep track of and for us to manage those pieces of information. Now, you'll notice that I only created variables for the character's name and for the character's age. And that's because those two pieces of information are occurring multiple times in the story. I didn't create a variable for the word once or for the word man because I just didn't need to. You know what I mean? That's not like a distinct piece of information that we want to keep track of. But the character's name and the character's age are definitely pieces of information that we're going to want to keep track of and store. So that's sort of how we can use variables to make it easier to manage the data in our programs. Now, I want to show you guys another cool thing we can do with this. Let's say that halfway through the story, I wanted the character's name to change. I can actually come down here and halfway through printing out the story, I can modify the value of one of these variables. So I could say character name, and I could just give this another value. So I could say character name is equal to Mike. And again, I need this semicolon at the end here, don't forget that. Now, halfway through the story, the character's name is actually gonna change. So if we run the program, you'll see over here it says Tom, and then down here the name is Mike. So I was able to update the value that was stored inside of our variable halfway through. And that's another cool thing is these variables, you can give them one value and then later on in the program you can change that value. So that's really the basics of working with variables. We really learned two things. We learned how to create variables and we learned how to use them inside of like a print statement over here. Now there's a lot more to learn with this, and actually in the next tutorial I'm going to be teaching you guys about the different types of information that we can store inside of variables. So over here we stored a string of text and we also stored a whole number, which is called an integer. But there's a few other types of data that we can use and work with. So in the next tutorial, we're going to learn about all of that stuff. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about data types in C#. Now in C#, we're going to be dealing with all different types of data and information. And generally when you're writing programs, there's going to be all different types of information that you're going to be working with. So I want to talk to you guys today about the different types of information and the different types of data that we can represent and work with in C#. So down here, I'm basically going to be showing you guys all the different data types that we can use, and I'll be doing that by creating variables. So a variable is just a container where we can store a data value or a piece of information, and I'm going to be creating different variables that can store the different types of data that we can work with in C#. So the first type of data that we can work with is plain text. So anytime you want to represent or use just regular old text inside of your programs, you want to use something called a string. So I'm just going to say string, and I'll just call it phrase, and I'm just going to set it equal to a string. So a string is basically just denoted using an open and closed quotation mark, and then inside of the quotation marks you can just put whatever string you want to represent. So in here I could put like Draft Academy, and now this is going to be a string with the text Draft Academy inside of it. So that's a string, and that's going to come in handy a lot. Another type of data that we can store is, instead of a string of text, just going to be one single character. So if I want to create a character, I can just say char, and maybe this could be like the grade you get on a test or something. And then when I create a character, I want to use these single quotation marks, just like that. And then inside here, I can put one single character. So I can put like an A or a B or a C or something like that. But the important difference is that with a character, I can only put one single character. I can't put a bunch of stuff. I can only put one. So any single character is going to work, but you need to make sure that there's only one in there. When you need more than one character, then you want to move up to the string. All right, so that's the two ways we can store plain text, so things like characters and strings of characters. We can also work with numbers, and the most basic type of number we can create is called an integer. And an integer is basically just a whole number, so it's one of the counting numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Basically, an integer doesn't have any decimals in it, so I can just say int like that, int, and this could be like someone's age, for example. So maybe someone's like 30. And you'll notice that when I create a number, like any numbers, or whether it's an integer or another type of number, you don't need quotation marks around it like you do up here. So you can just type out the number as is. And you can do whole numbers like this, like an integer. We could also do negative numbers, and you can just put the minus sign right in front of it, and C# is going to be able to handle negative numbers just fine. So in addition to integers, we can also represent decimal numbers. So a decimal number would be, like 60.3 or something like that. And instead of storing it inside of an integer, we can actually store it in one of 3 data types. So there's actually 3 different data types that we can use to represent decimal numbers, and they're called, there's a float, a double, and a decimal. And these basically allow you to store decimal points more and more specifically. So these range from least accurate with the float to most accurate with the decimal data type. So if you really want to be super precise with the decimal point that you're using, you want to use a decimal point. And this would be used for things like money, or really anything that you need to be extremely exact with, you want to use a decimal. A float is going to be less precise, so it's going to be able to be taken to a less precise amount of decimal places, and then double is kind of just like right there in the middle. For the purposes of this course, I think for the most part we're just going to be using a double. I think for most use cases a double is going to be just fine, but like I said, if you're doing something where you need to be extremely accurate, like with money or something, then you want to use that decimal. So I can just say double, and I can give this a name. So we can make this like a GPA, right? Someone's GPA might be like a 3.2. And so this is a good example of a decimal number. You could also make these just normal numbers. So I could make it like 3.0. But anytime I'm using a decimal number, I need to include this 0.0 in there. So that's integers and doubles, and those are the 2 main types of, like I said, numbers we're going to be able to represent: whole numbers and then decimal numbers. And then we kind of touched on like the different types of decimal numbers. So after characters and numbers, we just have one more like core data type that we're going to be representing, which is going to be called a Boolean. And a Boolean is essentially just a true or a false value. Now, a lot of times in programming, we're actually going to want to be able to store true, false information. And this might not be something that is super intuitive to you if you've never programmed before, but a lot of times storing information in the form of a true or false value is going to come in handy. So if I want to create a Boolean, I can just say BOOL, and Boolean is just it essentially just means a true or false value. So I can say BOOL, and I can give this a name. So we could call this like is male. And this Boolean will basically tell us whether or not someone is a male. So I could say true if we're a male, or you could also say false. But those are the only 2 values that this should have. It should either be true or it should be false. That's it. And that's basically why Booleans are useful, because they can only have 2 values. So for the most part, I would say these are the core data types that you're going to be using in C#. Now there are a few other data types that we can get into. They're a little bit more obscure and they're not used as commonly as these data types. For the most part, you're going to be fine with just strings, characters, numbers, and then Boolean values. 99% of the stuff that you want to do, you're going to be able to do with just this data. And as a beginner, you only really want to concern yourself with these data types. Now, I do want to point one more thing out, is you can represent these data types outside of variables. So if I came down here and said like console.writeLine, I don't have to like store this type of data inside of a variable if I don't want to. Like I could just print out like a string like hello down here. Like this isn't actually stored inside of a variable. Or I could print out like a number. Like if I wanted to print out 30, I could do that. And then when I run my program, you can see we printed out just fine. these are what we would call constants, and a constant is basically just like a value just like this, 30. It's not stored in a variable. We're not keeping track of it anywhere. It's just kind of written out. You can do the same thing for booleans. So obviously you don't have to store this information inside of variables. A lot of times it's useful to do that, but if you don't want to, you can just kind of use it like that. So that's the basics of data types in C#, and these are going to come in handy a lot. Really, with just these types of data up here, you can write a bunch of awesome programs. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about strings in C#. Now, strings are one of the most useful types of data that you're going to be working with in C#. So in this tutorial, I want to just show you all the ins and outs of working with strings. We're going to look at some of the cool things that you can do with them and how you can really leverage the power of strings inside of your programs. So down here, you'll notice that I just have this little console.writeLine instruction, and basically this is just going to write out some text onto the screen. So if I wanted to create a string, I can just make these open and close quotation marks, and then in here I could type out some text. So I could type out like Draft Academy, and now when I run my program, it's going to go ahead and print that onto the screen. So anytime that I want to represent some sort of like plain text or really any type of text in my program, I can do it with a string. And there's actually some cool things you can do with these strings. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to print out Draft Academy, but I wanted to print out draft on one line and then Academy on the next line. I can use something called a new line character. So I could actually say \n, and this is a special character that we can use in C# strings, which is basically going to specify that we want to type out draft, then a new line, then Academy. So now when I run and there's actually some cool things you can do with these strings. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to print out Draft Academy, but I wanted to print out draft on one line and then Academy on the next line. I can use something called a new line character. So I could actually say \n, and this is a special character that we can use in C# strings, which is basically going to specify that we want to type out draft, then a new line, then Academy. So now when I run my program, you'll see that draft and Academy are printed out on different lines. So that can come in handy when you're writing out your strings. There's also another way, so let's say that I wanted to write out a quotation mark. If I put a quotation mark here, you'll notice that this quotation mark effectively ends this string, and then this over here is just causing an error. If I want to actually print out a literal quotation mark that's not, delineating the string, I can just use that \ again, and now we'll be able to print out that quotation mark, no problem, just like that. So those are some cool little things that we can do inside of our strings. You can also take a string and store it inside of a variable. So a variable is just a container that you can store different pieces of information. So if I wanted, I could create a variable over here, just say string, and we can just call it like phrase, and I'm just going to set it equal to this text over here, which is just going to be Draft Academy. And then down here, I could just print out the value stored inside of this variable. So I could print out the value stored in the phrase variable, and we're still printing out Draft Academy. So that's kind of cool. Another thing you can do with strings is called concatenation. And concatenation is the process of taking one string and then appending another string onto the end of it. So you're essentially just adding two strings together. So for example, over here I could say string phrase is equal to Draft Academy, and then I could use this plus sign, and then this is basically going to add another string onto that. So I could say like is cool. And now when I print out phrase, it's going to be printing out Draft Academy is cool. So it basically just added those two strings together. We would call that concatenation, and that can be really useful. Another thing we can do in our programs is find out information about our strings. So sometimes you might want to figure out different pieces of information about the string, figure out some attributes about it. So let's say we wanted to figure out how many characters were inside of this string. I could just say phrase dot length, and that's with a capital L. And now what this is going to do is it's actually going to tell me how many characters are inside of this string. So now we should get like 15. Yeah, because there's 15 characters inside of Draft Academy. So that's a really cool way we can find out some information about the string. In addition to finding out information, we can also use things called methods. And we're going to talk more about methods in a future tutorial, but essentially all you need to know right now is that a method is basically a little block of code that we can call, which is going to perform a specific task. So these are basically like little predefined snippets of code that we can sort of tell to execute, and then they'll do something. So we can use methods on our strings, and they'll either give us information about our strings, or they'll modify our strings in some way. So over here, if I want to use one of these string methods, I can just say the name of the string, or I could also type out like a literal string like that, and then I can just say dot. So I'm going to say phrase dot, and now I have access to all of these different methods. So if I want to use one, I can just type out the name of the method, and I'll show you these can kind of do little things with our strings. So let's say that I wanted to take this string over here and convert it into all uppercase. Well, there's actually a method that's going to be able to do that for us. So I could say phrase dot to upper, and then I'm going to make an open and closed parentheses, and now this is actually going to take this string over here, convert it into uppercase, and then print out the uppercase string onto the console. So now when I run the program, you'll see we get Draft Academy all in caps. You can also do the same thing for lowercase, so I could say like to lower, and now it'll do the same thing. So it should all be entirely lowercase now, which it is. So that's one way that we could like modify the value of a string. We could also find out some more information about this string. So imagine we wanted to figure out if this string of text contained a certain like substring of text, right? So maybe we wanted to see if this string had the word academy in it. I could say phrase dot contains, and now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to give this contains method a piece of information, and this is called a parameter. So this over here, this contains method, will tell us whether or not this phrase string contains like a certain set of characters or something. And in order to use it, I have to tell it what I'm looking for. So I can say phrase.contains, and in here I could say like academy, and this is basically going to return a true or false value telling me whether or not the phrase Draft Academy contains the word academy. And we should get a true value back because it does. So you can see over here we get true. But if I said over here like academies, now all of a sudden we should get false back because that string is not included in the phrase string. It's not included in Draft Academy. And that can be kind of useful. You can like tell whether or not a certain string contains another string or another character. Another thing we can do is figure out the different characters inside of a string. So I'm going to get rid of that. Let's say that I wanted to figure out what the first character in my string was, right? So let's say there's a situation where I have a string like phrase, and I wanted to figure out what's the first character in that string. Well, I can actually access individual characters and print them out. So I could say like phrase, and I can make an open and closed square bracket. And inside of here, I can just put the index of the character that I want to print out inside of the string. So if I put a 0 here, this is going to tell me what this first character is. So phrase square bracket 0 should be printing out a capital G. And you see over here, it does. If I wanted to figure out what the third character in the string was, I can say 0, 1, 2. So I can say 2, and now this should print out that R for us. And you can see we get R. So if you haven't caught on by now, when we're indexing a string, we actually start at 0. So if I was going to assign index positions to each of the characters inside of this string, I would say that the G character is at index position 0, the I character is at index position 1, the R character is at index position 2, the A character is at index position 3, etc. So the first character, this G, is actually at index position 0 inside of the string, and that's basically just a way that C# and actually a way that most programming languages index strings. So when I say phrase 0, this is actually referring to this first character. So let's see if we could print out this A over here. Well, it's basically going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is going to be at index position 8. So if I put an 8 in here, now we should be able to print out that capital A, which we do over here. So that's sort of how string indexes work. And using this information, we can use another string method. So again, I'm just gonna say phrase dot, and I wanna show you guys another method that we can use. It's called index of. And index of is basically gonna tell us not only if a string contains a certain value, but it'll tell us at what index position
Yes,
that
sir.
value is located inside of the string. So for example, if I came over here and said academy, this is going to tell me at what index position academy starts inside of this string. So when I run my program, you'll see that we're getting an 8 over here. And we just sort of saw that that capital A character started at index position 8. So basically what this is saying is that academy starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it starts here. In addition to passing in a string like that,
Blender
I
is
could also
good for
pass in a
3D
character.
objects and stuff.
Remember, a character is just an open and closed single quotation mark, and then inside here I could put like an F, and now this will tell me the location of the first F inside of this string. So it'll give me that index, and you can see we get 4, and that's because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, this starts at a 4, and that can be pretty useful. There's also going to be the situation where the character isn't in there, so if I put a Z in here, you'll notice that there's no Z up here. And so in this case, we're actually just going to get a -1 back, and a -1 is always going to signify that the character is not inside of the string, so that can be pretty useful. So that's how we can use phrase.indexOf, and that'll come in handy a lot. There's also one more of these string methods that I want to show you, and it's called substring. So I can say phrase.substring, I can make it open and close parentheses, and I'm actually going to need to give this a value. So basically what this will allow me to do is it'll allow me to grab a part of this string. So I could grab like one part of the string and then print that out onto the screen. And we can give this one parameter, we can give this one argument, in other words, one piece of information, and that's basically the index where we want to start grabbing the string at. So let's say that I only wanted to grab this academy word and print this out. Well, remember, academy starts at index position 8. We already saw that. So this capital A is actually index position 8 in the string. If I put an 8 in here, this is now going to grab the characters starting at 8 and going to the end of the string. So now we should just print out academy, which we do down here. You can also, in addition to just passing in the starting index, you can pass in a length. And you'll notice that I'm just using a comma here, and that's going to delineate that I want to pass in another value. So I'm passing in the starting index, and I can also pass in how many characters I want to grab. So I can say I want to start grabbing the characters at 8, and let's say that I only want to grab 3 characters. So over here I can put a 3. And now we're going to start at 8, and we're going to grab 1, 2, 3 characters. So we should get ACA printed out onto the screen. And you can see that that substring method can come in handy. So that's kind of the basics of working with strings, and so I showed you guys kind of how we can work with them, different things we could do like concatenation, and we can also print out things like new lines. We also looked at getting information about a string, like the length, also print substring method, CA printed out onto this. So that's kind of the and you can see that so I showed you guys kind of how we can work with them, different things we could do like concatenation, and we can also print out things like new lines. We also looked at getting information about a string, like the length and individual characters in the string. We talked about the string indexes. We also talked about different methods that we can use to do different things with our strings. So hopefully that kind of gets you up to speed with why strings are awesome and how they're useful. And to be honest with you, there's a lot more of these little methods that you can use. And if you want, you can just go online and Google C# string methods, and you'll find like a huge listing of probably at least a few dozen of these different methods that you can use to either find out information about or modify your strings. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about numbers in C#. Now, numbers are one of the most common types of data that you're going to be working with in your C# programs. So in this tutorial, I just want to kind of give you guys a full walkthrough of how to use numbers, the different types of numbers that we can use, and we're also going to look at some cool things that we can do with numbers, things like complex math operations, and just dealing with numbers in general. So this is going to be pretty cool. Down here, I just have a basic program. It just is basically writing out a line of text. So if I wanted to, for example, like write out a number, I can just represent a number by just typing it out. So I can say like 40 or 20, or I could say like negative 5.763. Really any type of number I can work with. And there's really two main types of numbers. There's a whole number, which we would refer to as like an integer, and then there's a decimal number. So those two different types of numbers are going to be really useful in our C# programs. But it's important that you note that C# does distinguish between those two types of numbers. So there is a big difference between working with whole numbers and working with decimal numbers, and that's something that you just want to be aware of as you sort of go through and write your programs. And so, you know, basically I could just type in a number here like 50, and then I'd be able to print it out onto the screen just over there like that. So numbers are pretty easy to work with. We can also do math with numbers. So I could say like 5 plus 8, and now instead of printing out 5 plus 8, like the literal text 5 plus 8, C# is actually going to go ahead and perform this math operation for us. So it's going to print out the result of adding 5 and 8 together, so we're going to get 13 over here. And we can use addition like that. We could also use subtraction, which is just that hyphen. We could use a / which would mean division, and we could also use a asterisk, which is going to represent multiplication. So any of those different operations, the 4 basic math operations you can use. We can also use another operator, which is called the modulus operator. So for example, if I could say like 5, and then I can put a % here, and I could say 2, and we would read this as 5 mod 2. And this modulus operator right there, essentially what this is going to do is it's going to take 5, it's going to divide it by 2, and it's going to give us the remainder. So 5 divided by 2 is going to be 2 with a remainder of 1, and that's exactly what's going to get printed out. So we should just print out 1 over here, which we do. So sometimes you might be interested in getting the remainder of a particular division operation, and this is going to go ahead and do that for us. We can also represent like mathematical equations. So one thing we can do is specify order of operations. So if I was to say like 4 plus 2 times 3, actually what's going to happen is the multiplication is going to happen first, and then this addition is going to happen. So it's going to be 3 times 2, 6 plus 4, so we should get 10. And that's just sort of following normal order of operations rules. But if I wanted to change up the order of operations, I can use parentheses. So I could say like 4 plus 2, which is going to be 6, and now it'll be 6 times 3, so we're going to get 18 instead of getting that 10. So you can use those parentheses to sort of change around the order that different calculations are getting performed, and those can be pretty useful. I also want to talk to you guys about the difference between using integers and using decimal numbers. So like I said, an integer is just a whole number. A decimal number would be, you know, a number that has a decimal on it, something like that. And actually, like I said, C# does distinguish between these two types of numbers. So if you're adding or subtracting or multiplying or doing some sort of mathematical operation with an integer and a whole number, sometimes the results you get are going to be a little bit different. So if I was just to say like 5.0 plus 8.1, if I was to perform a math operation with 2 decimal numbers, then I'm going to get a decimal answer back. So I'm going to get like 13.1. But if I was to perform a mathematical operation with an integer and a decimal, so 5 plus 8.1, and you'll notice that this is now an integer because it doesn't have a decimal point. Again, we're going to get a decimal back. So I'm going to get a decimal number back just like that. But when we do math operations with 2 integers, then we're always going to get an integer back. So if I said 5 divided by 2, and you'll notice that these are both integers, I'm actually going to get an integer answer back. So really this should be like 2 point something, right? It should have some long decimal point. But when I actually run my program, you'll see that I'm getting an integer value back. I'm getting a 2 back. But if I was to convert this to a double, so if I said 2.0, so now this is going to be a decimal number, we're going to get a decimal answer back. So that's basically how that works. So any math operation that you do with 2 integers, no matter what, you're going to get an integer back. But if you do a math operation with a decimal and an integer, then you'll always get a double back. And that'll kind of come in handy as you're working with these different types of numbers. Another thing we can do is we can store numbers inside of variables. So I could create a variable up here. Let's create one for int. So I'm just going to say int num, and I can give this a value of like 6, right? So now this container num is storing the value of 6, and then I could print that out just like I normally would. So I could just say num down there, and it'll print out that 6. There's another cool operation which we can do, which will basically allow us to increment this number. So down here I could say num plus plus, and basically what this is going to do is it's going to add 1 to the number. So now instead of being 6, since we're adding 1 to the number, this is going to be 7. So when I run my program, you see we'll get 7. And you can do a similar thing with minus minus. So I could say like num minus minus, and now instead of getting a 6, we would get a 5. And those are going to come in handy just as like a shorthand as we go through our C# journey. All right, so those are sort of the basics of, you know, working with numbers, and you can see we can store them in variables, and we talked about, you know, interacting between integers and decimal numbers. And I also want to show you guys some other stuff we can do. So a lot of times in our programs, we're going to want to be able to perform different math operations. So there's all sorts of math operations, you know, like using exponents and using the square root, or, you know, even doing like logarithmic stuff or sine, cosine, tangent stuff. Like there's all sorts of math things that we might want to be able to do inside of our programs. And I'm going to show you guys, there's these things called methods. And a method is basically just a block of code that's going to perform a specific task. So I can do what's called call a method, and when I call a method, it's basically going to like perform a specific task or a specific function for me. And there's a bunch of these different math methods that we can use in our C# programs, and the way that we can get access to them is just by typing out math with a capital M, and then I can say dot, and now I have access to all these different math operations. So you'll see down here, I can like scroll down through this list, and there's all these different things that I can do. I'm going to show you guys a couple of these cool math methods is what they're called, and you can kind of see what they do. So one is just math.abs, and this stands for absolute value. So I can make an open and close parentheses, and inside of here I'm going to put a number. So if I said like -40, this is going to give me back the absolute value of -40, which is just going to be 40, as you can see. There's another one which is called POW, and this stands for power. So I'm actually going to be able to give this 2 numbers, and it's going to spit out the first number taken to the second number. So if I said like 3 and then 2 over here, this is going to give me back 3 raised to the second power. So we should get 9, and you can see we do. And this will also work with like decimal numbers. So I could say like 3.8 raised to the second power, and now we should be able to run this as well. So 14.44. And you can also do the opposite. So we get this number. So I could say like 3.8 raised to the second power, and now we should be able to run this as well. So 14.44. And you can also do the opposite. So we could say like SQRT. This is going to stand for square root. So if I put like a 36 in here, now I'm actually going to get back the square root of 36, so we should get 6 back, and we do. There's also another useful method which is called max, and with max you can actually pass 2 numbers into these parentheses. So I could say like 4 and 90, and max is actually going to spit out whichever one is bigger. So it'll tell us which number is the biggest. And so this should give us 90, as you can see down there. And that can come in handy. There's going to be a lot of situations in C# where you might have 2 numbers. Maybe they're stored inside of variables, and you don't necessarily know which one is bigger. So you can use that math function to figure that out. There's also another one called min, and that just does the opposite. So now this will give us the smaller of the 2 numbers. So we're going to get 4 back. There's one more that I want to show you guys. It's called math.round, and this is a really great way to round numbers. So when I say math.round, I could pass this like a decimal number like 4.3, and this will round it just according to standard rounding rules. So you can see we get 4, but if I was to up this to like 4.6, now we're going to go ahead and get a 7 or a 5 back. So we get the 5 back there. So those are just some basic, you know, math operations that you can do. And you can see I'm using this Visual Studio text editor. When I just say math and then I click this dot, you can see all of these different options are showing up down here. So there's all these different methods that we can call. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff we can do. And you can kind of just like play around with each of these, like see what they do. But for the most part, like any major math operation that you're going to want to be able to do, there's usually going to be a method for it, or at least a method in here to help you with it. So you definitely want to check that out. And you can also just Google like C# math methods online, and you'll find a huge listing of them. So that's sort of the basics of, using math and then also working with numbers. Again, numbers are extremely important. So you want to make sure that you're, up to date and sort of up to speed with how to use them and how they interact with each other and all that stuff in C#. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to get input from a user in C#. Now, one of the cool things about C# is we can actually have our programs interact with the user. So I could run my program and I can actually give it some information, and it can use that information to do different things. And when you think about it, most programs that you probably use on a daily basis are going to allow you to input information into them, and then depending on the information that you input, they're going to do different things. So today we're going to look at the most basic form of that, which is just allowing the user to basically type in a value, and then we can use that value to do something. So down here I have a simple program set up. You'll see I'm just saying console.writeLine, and I'm writing out hello. And then down here, throughout this course so far, I've always included this line of code in our little programs. And basically what this line of code has been doing is it's been allowing us to see the output of our programs, right? So if I include this read line when I run my program, then I can see what gets output. So I can see hello, right? It sort of stays on the screen. But if I was to get rid of this line, like if I remove this, when I click the start button, you'll see that that window pops up really quick and then disappears. And that's because we're essentially executing this line of code, and then once that line of code's been executed, there's nothing else to execute, right? There's no other instructions for the computer to carry out. So essentially the program just terminates and then that window disappears. We've been using this console.readLine instruction in order to keep that black window up on the screen, in order to keep the console on the screen, because what this line does is it actually waits for the user to enter in a line of text. So this line essentially pauses the execution of our program and waits for the user to enter something. So if the user hasn't entered something, then our program is essentially just paused. So actually, if you guys watch over here, my program is essentially paused, but if I was to enter something and then click enter, the program terminates, right? Because now this line of code down here has finished executing. But what's cool about this line is, like I said, it pauses the program so we can sort of see what's happening. Another thing that this line of code does, though, is it allows us to enter in a line of text. And we can actually use this instruction over here to get input from the user. So I'm going to show you guys how we can do that. In this tutorial, I want to basically design a little application that's going to ask the user for their name, it's going to get their name, and then it's going to say hi to them. So I'll basically be able to type in my name, and then the computer will be like, hey Mike, what's up? So the way we can do that is with a couple steps. The first thing we want to do is prompt the user for information. So I'm basically just going to write out a line, and I'm just going to say console.write. And you'll notice before we were using console.writeLine. Now essentially the difference between write and writeLine is that when we say writeLine, this is going to print out a line of text, and then it's going to go on to a new line. So it's basically going to print out and then we'll go on to a new line. When I just say console.write, it's not going to go off to a new line. It's just going to kind of print out on the same line. And you guys will see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to use console.write because I'm basically going to be prompting the user. So I can just say enter your name, and then I'm going to make a colon. So this is going to be our prompt for the user. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to be able to allow the user to enter in a line of text. So I can do that, like I said, with console.readLine, just like that. And this is going to pause the program and wait for the user to enter in a line of text. But here's the thing. I don't just want to let them enter in the line of text. I want to be able to take the text that they enter and store it inside of a variable, right? Like if they just enter text, it's no use to me if I don't know what they entered. So I want to be able to store the value that they entered somewhere. And we can do that with a variable. So whenever we use this console.readLine, it's basically going to get the line of text that they enter as a string. So it's going to store the line of text that the user enters as a string of characters. So I'm going to create a variable, and we're just going to call this name, and I'm going to set this equal to console.readLine. So I'm saying string name is equal to console.readLine, just like that. Now the last thing I want to do is I'm actually going to write something out to the screen. So I'm just going to say write line, And over here, we're going to print out hello, and then we're going to print out the name that the user entered. So I'm basically just going to print out hello plus name. So basically, the user is going to enter in their name, and then we're going to say hi to the user. And you'll notice I'm keeping this read line down there just so we can see what the output is. So let's go ahead and run this program, and we'll see what happens. So over here, it says enter your name. And you'll notice over here, it's letting me enter this on the same line as this prompt. And that's why we use .console.write instead of console.write line. So over here, I'm just going to type in my name. My name's Mike. And now when I click enter, the value Mike is going to get stored inside of that name variable. And then we're going to be able to print it out on the screen. So you can see down here, we're printing out hello Mike. And that's essentially all we needed to do to get this program to work. So we used console.
Let's go one step further by ourselves only. Let's ask for 3 things: name, age, and maybe the profession. Then we again go for the read the console line. And the same step in the beats. I know maybe you are not able to see it properly. Still, let me check just a second. It is shifty. Just a second. Now it should be visible. console read line, right? What he did was just type his name. So I think we have to store it in a variable, right? We have to create a string first. Here's the string.
Woodbury.
I think we are good now. Wait. I crashed it. My bad. Now we should start again. You won't be able to sit properly on the vertical stream for now at least. So there's that. Maybe now you can. Nice. Just a second. Yes, see, now it's working properly. So there's that. Profession, right?
Lit lag.
Let's try to run the program. I think we messed up that one, the age one at least. Try this. Okay. We learned that.
.readline, which paused the program and let the user enter in a line inside of this name variable, and then we printed it out onto the screen. So that's pretty cool, and we can actually do this as many times as we wanted. So if I wanted, I could get another piece of, and this time I'm going to ask them to enter in their age. So over here, we're going to create another string, and we're just going to call it age. And again, I'm just going to say console.readline. So now, in addition to having their name, we also have their age. So I could say hello, name.
That is what we had to do.
And then I can basically tell them how old they are. So I can say you are, and then we'll print out their age. So now we're saying hello, whatever the name is, you are, whatever their age is. So let's go ahead and run this program. Now we're getting two pieces of information from the user. So it says, enter your name. So when I click enter, we're gonna have two values and we'll be able to print them out. So it says, hello, John, you are 40. So that's sort of the basics of getting input from the user. And again, remember what I said, when I use console.readline, it's taking whatever the user enters and it's storing it as a variable. So this is always going to be a variable. It's always going to get the information that they enter as a variable. And that's why we had to store both of those pieces of information inside of strings. But there's actually a way that we can get other types of information like numbers from the user. And in the next tutorial, we're going to build a little calculator game, and I'm going to show you guys how we can actually get numbers from the user. But for now, that is sort of the basics of doing this. And you probably just want to practice with this and maybe make a little application of your own. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to build a basic calculator in C#. So we're basically going to build a little program where the user can enter in two numbers, and then our program will add them together and spit out the answer onto the screen. So it should be kind of cool. And we're also going to talk about getting numbers as input from the user. So this is going to be a pretty cool tutorial. So down here, before we start building this, I actually want to show you guys how we can convert a string into a number. And this is a technique that's going to come in handy for this application. Essentially, like if I had a string that had a number in it, so like 45 or like 45.80, what I could do is I could actually use a special method in C# that would be able to convert this into an actual number. And the reason that's useful is because like if I had console.writeLine, like if I had two strings that had numbers inside of them, like 43 plus 56, if I tried to add these two together, this is just going to concatenate the strings. So you'll see over here we get 4356. So it's not adding the two numbers that are in here together, it's just like concatenating the strings together. So in certain cases you'll have numbers that are kind of trapped inside of strings, and actually we're going to have that situation in this tutorial. And so you want to be able to get the numbers out of there so that you can like do math with them. So I'm going to show you guys how we can convert a string into a number. So actually over here, why don't we come down here and we're going to make a number variable. So I'm just going to make an integer and we'll just call this num, and I'm going to set it equal to a string. So I'm going to set it equal to a string that has a number in it, like 45. And you'll see over here, C# is yelling at us because this number is actually a string. So it's not going to be able to be stored inside of an integer variable. So we need to convert this into a integer. And the way that we can do that is just by typing out convert like that and with a capital letter and then dot. And now we need to specify what we want to convert. So you'll see over here there's a bunch of options like 2int32, 2int16, 2 double, 2 decimal, 2 string. This little convert function is basically going to allow us to convert different values to other values. In our case, we want to convert this to an integer. So I'm just going to say convert.toInt32, and that was one of the options that we had over here. And then I'm going to make an open and close parentheses around the actual string. So when I do this, this is going to go ahead and convert the string inside of here into an integer. And just to note, the string that we put in here has to have a number inside of it. Like if this was just something like that, this isn't going to work. We're actually going to get an error. But if I have a number in here like 45, then this is going to work just fine. So if I was to come down here now, I could actually use this as an integer. So I could say num plus 6, and now we'll actually be able
Just a second. Hello, 1 2 3 4 testing. Why is that not working? Hello? Is it working properly? Okay, it seems to be working properly.
Able to do this math operation. So you can see we get 51. And that's essentially how we can convert a string into an integer. And just so I can point this out, like if this didn't have a number inside of it, or even if it did have a number inside of it, but the number had like text next to it, this isn't gonna work. So we're actually gonna get an error. And you can see the program wasn't able to run because it says down here, input string was not in correct format. So that's just something to keep in mind. And later in the course, we're actually going to talk about how we can fix something like this and mitigate it. But for now, we're just going to assume that the string is going to be formatted correctly. And I'm just going to exit out of this exception. All right, so that's kind of an explanation of how we can convert a string into an integer. And we're actually going to be able to use this in our program. So like I said, we're going to build a calculator program that's going to allow the user to enter in two numbers, and then we'll take those numbers, add them together, and print it out. So the first thing I'm going to do is just print out a prompt. So I'm going to say console.write, and I'm actually just going to use write. And then over here, I'm just going to say enter a number. And now we're prompting the user to enter a number. And what I want to do now is I want to be able to get the number that they enter. So I'm just going to say console.readLine. And this is going to go ahead and wait. It's going to pause the program until they enter in a line of text. And so what I actually want to do is I want to store the number that they enter inside of a variable. So I'm going to create a variable over here, int, and we're just going to call it num1, and I'm going to set it equal to console.readLine. But you'll notice over here we're getting an error. And the problem is that console.readLine is going to give us a string. So console.readLine takes whatever the user enters and turns it into a string, and that's sort of the value that we have. If we want to eventually add these numbers together, we're not going to be able to int a string like I showed you before. So we're actually going to have to convert this into an integer, which now we know how to do. So I can just say convert.toInt32, and I'm going to surround console.readLine, this whole thing, with parentheses. So now this whole thing is surrounded with these parentheses, and it's going to get converted into an integer. And that's basically all we need to do for that. So now I'm going to copy this, and we'll be able to get the second number. So I'm going to come down here, and I'll just say enter another number, and we're going to call this one num2. And so now we're prompting the user for a number, we're getting that number and turning it into an integer, and we're doing the same thing down here. So the last thing we want to do now is just print out the answer. So I'm going to go ahead and say console.println or writeLine, and I'm just going to write out num1 plus num2. Because we converted these guys into integers, we're going to be able to add them together. So let's go ahead and run this program, and we'll see how we did. It says enter a number, so let's enter in a 10, and enter another number, so why don't we enter in a 3? And so now it's going to convert both of those into integers and add them together, and we get 13. So it looks like the program's working out pretty well. There's actually a problem with this program though. If I was trying to add a integer number with a decimal number, so if I said like 4, and over here I put in like a 2.6, this is actually not going to work. So you'll see the program isn't actually printing anything out. That's because the program is stalling. We didn't enter in a correct value. We entered in a decimal value, and this can't be converted into an integer. So you'll notice that the program over here is stalling. And basically that's because we entered in a decimal number. So if I wanted to allow this program to be able to handle decimal numbers, instead of converting these to integers, I'd want to convert them to doubles. So I could change both of these to doubles like this, double, double. And instead of saying convert.toInt32, I could say convert.toDouble. And same thing down here. And now we should be able to work with decimal numbers in our program. So let's see if we can do that. I want to add 2 and 3.6. And now we're able to add those two together. So in certain circumstances, you might want to have a situation where the user can only enter in integer numbers, but I think in most cases you'd want to use doubles just like I did down there. And you can see how easy it is to convert them into doubles instead of integers. So that's a very basic calculator, and that kind of gives you an idea of how we can get numbers as input from a user. like in this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to build a little Mad Libs game in C#. Now, if you're not familiar with Mad Libs, it's basically a game where you can enter in a bunch of like random words. So maybe like a couple nouns, an adjective, an adverb, and you'll take all those random words and you'll kind of sprinkle them in throughout a story. And generally, because you're entering in random words, the story ends up being like pretty funny. So I actually have an example of a Mad Lib over here in my web browser. You'll see it's basically just a little story and you kind of sprinkle in different words. Like this one is asking for an adjective or a plural noun or a celebrity name. So these are pretty fun, and I actually want to show you guys how we can build a Mad Libs for ourselves in C#. It's actually really easy. And so down here, I have a little program set up. It's basically just writing out this story. So it's writing out roses are red, violets are blue, I love you. And this is sort of like a classic little poem, but I think this poem would be a lot better if we turned it into a Mad Libs. So how about instead of saying roses are red, we would say roses are, and we'll let the user choose a color. And instead of saying violets are blue, we'll let the user choose a plural noun. And instead of saying I love you, we'll let the user choose a celebrity that they're gonna love. And so we'll basically allow the user to enter in 3 random words, and then we'll sprinkle them in through our story, and hopefully it'll be pretty funny. So let's think about how we can build a Mad Libs. Essentially what we're gonna do is we're gonna have to prompt the user for input. We're gonna have to take that input and store it inside of variables. So let's go ahead and do that. And essentially what we're gonna need is we're gonna need 3 variables.
Need a color, need a noun, we need a celebrity, right? So as he said, 3 variables. So basically, first of all, we are going to play a game. Add a new line, maybe adding the new line. Give the following, fill in the following blanks. Then like we can add something like that. So that way we can use nouns and stuff. 3 variables, 3 strings to use, and to write console dot write a read line into it. Yeah.
Variables to store the color, the plural noun, and the celebrity. So I'm actually going to show you guys one way that we can do that, and we're actually going to declare these variables first, and then we're going to give them values. So up here I'm just going to say string, and I'm basically just going to tell C# that I'm going to want to use 3 variables in my program. So I'm going to want to use one called color, I'm going to want to use one called plural noun, and I'm going to want to use one called celebrity. And I'm just going to put a semicolon after this. And if you've been following along with this course, we haven't necessarily been doing, exactly this every time we were creating variables. But this is one way that we can create a variable, and we're basically just declaring the variables up here. And now down here, we're going to go ahead and give them values. And actually, we want to let the user give these variables their values because the user is going to be entering in the color, the plural noun, and the celebrity. So let's go ahead and write out some prompts. So I'm just going to say console.write, and in here I'm going to ask the user to enter a color. So I'm just going to say enter a color. And after I prompt them, I want to wait for them to enter in the color. So I'm just going to say console.readLine, and this is basically going to pause the program and wait for them to enter in a line of text. But I want to take the line of text that they enter and store it somewhere. So I'm going to store it inside of this color variable. So I'm just going to say color, which we declared up here. And down here, I'm going to give it a value. So I'm going to say color is equal to whatever the user enters. And we can basically do the same thing for the other 2. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And down here, I'm just going to paste it. So I'm actually going to make some new lines. And so now, instead of a color, we're going to want to get a plural noun. And then down here, instead of setting the color variable equal to whatever they enter, now we're going to store this value inside of the plural noun variable. And then finally down here, instead of asking for the color, we're going to ask for a celebrity, and we're going to store that inside of the celebrity variable. So now we've prompted the user to enter in those 3 things. We've stored all of their responses inside of variables. So the last step is to put those guys into our story. So over here, I'm going to say roses are, and I'm going to use the color. And then instead of just saying plural noun, I'm gonna say plural noun plus our blue. And then finally we'll do the same for the celebrity. So I'm taking the variables and I'm sprinkling them in through a little bit different. So let's go ahead and we'll run this program and we'll see how we did. So over here it says enter a color. So why don't we enter in like magenta, enter a plural noun. Let's do microwaves, and enter a celebrity. Why don't we do like Tom Hanks? So all of these values that I entered are getting stored in the corresponding variables. And now when I click enter here, it should print all of them out inside of our Mad Libs. So I clicked enter and it says roses are magenta, microwaves are blue, I love Tom Hanks. So we actually built a fully functioning Mad Libs, right? I can go in, I can enter in any values that I would want, and those are gonna get sprinkled into the Mad Lib. Now, over here, we built a very simple Mad Libs, right? This was, you know, essentially 3 inputs, and then we put them into a very simple poem. But you can see how you could use this same technique in order to ask the user to enter in like maybe 10 or 20 different words, and you can make a way more complex story down there. So essentially with very few lines of code, I mean, this is probably, you know, 10 lines of code, we were able to write out an entire Mad Lib in C#. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about arrays in C#. A lot of times when we're writing programs in C#, we're going to be dealing with all types of data. And a lot of times we're going to be dealing with large amounts of data. And one way that we can manage and keep track of the data in our programs is by using variables. But the one problem with variables is that they can only store a single value. So I can create a variable like an integer variable or a string variable, but I could only store one integer or one string inside of that variable container. And a lot of times if we're dealing with huge amounts of information, we're not going to want to have to create like hundreds or thousands of variables. So there's actually another container, another type of data structure that we can use in C#, which is called an array. And an array is basically a structure that allows us to hold multiple pieces of information in the same container. So unlike a variable that can only hold one value, an array can hold multiple values. So you could hold 10 or 100 or 1,000 or even 1,000,000 values inside of an array. So a good way to think of an array is just a collection of individual variables, right? So an array can hold like 20 different values that you would normally have to put inside of a variable. So I'm going to show you guys how we can create arrays. We'll talk about sort of the basics of using them, and I'll kind of get you guys up to speed with using arrays in C#. So down here in my program, I'm going to go ahead and create an array. And remember, an array is just a container that can hold a bunch of pieces of information. So we create an array very similar to how we create a variable. The first thing we have to do is specify the type of information or the type of data that the array is going to hold. So we can use all the basic data types, string, int, double, boolean. We can use all those things. In our case, let's make an array of integers. So I'm just going to say int, and then I'm going to type a space. Now, whenever we're creating an array in C#, we always need to let C# know that. So the way that we can tell C# that we want to make a variable instead of an array is by making an open and closed square bracket. And that's going to signify that this is going to be an array. And then over here, I can type the name of the array that I want to create. So I can give this array a name. So why don't we just call this like lucky numbers? We'll create an array that's going to store a list of lucky numbers. In order to give this array some information, there's actually a couple different ways we can assign values to arrays. I'm going to show you guys all the ways in this tutorial, but the most basic way is to just make an open and closed curly bracket, and then inside of here we can start typing out the values that we want to put inside of our array. So I can just start typing out some numbers and we'll be able to store them all in the same container. So over here I'm just going to type like 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. So I'm just typing out a bunch of different integers. And you'll notice that I have one value here, and then I separate it with a comma, and then I can put another value. So all of these would be considered elements inside of the array. So I would say like 4 is the first element in the array, 8 is the second element in the array. And we can delineate the elements using these commas. And essentially now we have a container, we have this lucky numbers container which is able to store all of these values. And this makes it really easy for us to manage and maintain large amounts of information. So, I mean, over here, I only have like maybe 6 numbers, but if I wanted, I could put hundreds or thousands or even millions of values inside of one of these arrays, and they're extremely useful. So now that we looked at how we can create an array, let's talk about how we can access the individual elements inside of an array. Right, because this array is going to be no use to us unless we can actually get access to each of these values. So I'm going to show you guys how we can do that, and I'm just going to do a console.writeLine. So we'll just print out a particular value onto the screen. So if I want to access a particular value, I can just type out the name of the array, so in our case lucky numbers, and then I want to make an open and closed square bracket. And inside of this square bracket, I want to give a number. So I'm basically going to specify the index of the element that I want to print out, or the index of the element that I want to access. So let's say I wanted to access this element 4 right here. It's the first element in the array. I'm going to put a 0 here. So this 4 element is at the 0th position. It's at the 0 index inside of the array. So now when I run my program, you'll see we're printing out 4. So we're printing out that first element in the array. And so the way that we index these array elements is starting with 0. So if you've been following along with this course, you'll know that this is the same way we index strings. So I would say that 4 is at index position 0 in the array, 8 is at index position 1, 15 is at index position 2, 16 at 3, etc. So we start counting. In other words, we start the indexing at 0. So over here, I could say like lucky numbers 2, and now we're going to get 0, 1, 2. We're going to get this 15 back. So we'll be printing out that 15. You can see over there. So essentially when we access an element in the array like this, it's a lot like we're accessing a variable. And it's actually, you can think of each one of these elements in here as their own kind of separate variables. And you can do everything with them that you could do with normal variables. So another thing we could do would be to update one of these elements. So for example, if I wanted, I could go ahead and change one of the values over here. So let's say we wanted to change this element. We wanted to change 8. Well, I could actually just say lucky numbers, and I'll make an open and close square bracket. I'm going to put the index of the element that I want to change. So this 8 is going to be at index position 1, and I can give this a new value. So we could give this a value of like 900. Now, if I print out lucky numbers 1, you'll see that the value will have updated. So now we get the value of 900 instead of just getting the value of 8. So I'm able to update these. I can really, do anything that I could do with a normal variable with each one of these individual values, and that's pretty cool. So in addition to creating an array of integers, I could also create like an array of strings. So why don't we do that? I'm going to make an array of strings, and I'm just going to call this friends. So this will be like a list of maybe my friends or something. And I'm going to show you guys another way that we can create an array like this. So you'll see up here right away, I was giving this array a bunch of values. So right off the bat, when I created it, I was populating this array with a bunch of information. But a lot of times when you create arrays in C#, you're not going to know exactly what elements you want to put inside of them. So if you don't know exactly what elements need to go in here up front, we can just create an empty array. So I could actually just say string friends, and I'm just going to set this equal to new string, and then I'm going to type an open and close square bracket. And inside of these square brackets, I need to put a number. And this number is going to tell C# how many elements we want this array to be able to hold. So if we create an array like this and we don't give it elements like we did up here, we still need to tell C# how many elements this array can hold. We need to basically tell C# how big we want to make the array. So over here, if I put 10 like that, that means that this friends array is going to be able to hold 10 values. If I put 3, that means the friends array is going to be able to hold 3 values. So why don't we put 5? And down here, what I can do is I can populate this array with information. So I could say like friends 0 is equal to, and then I could type out the name of a friend. So I could say like Jim. And then I could do the same thing for the other one. So I could say like friends 1 is equal to Kelly, etc. So I could do that for each element inside of this array and individually populate it. And this is actually going to come in handy in a lot of situations. And as we go forward in the course, I'm going to show you guys how we could do something like that in a future tutorial. But for now, just know that this is another way that we can create an array. All right, so really that is the basics of using arrays. Arrays are extremely simple, but they're extremely powerful. It's essentially just a type of container, much like a variable, but unlike a variable, it can store multiple pieces of information. And again, all of those pieces of information need to be of the same type, just like we have up here.
What we are looking for.
In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about methods in C#. Now, a method is basically just a little block of code where we can perform a specific task. So a lot of times when you're writing programs in C#, you'll have like a few lines of code, maybe like 5 or 10 lines, which are performing a specific task. Like the whole idea of having those lines in the program is that they're going to do a certain thing. So what we can actually do is we can create something called a method, which will allow us to take all that code and put it into its own little container. And then when we want to execute it and we want to perform the task that that code is going to carry out, we can just call that method and we'll be able to reuse it in different spots in our program. So I'm going to show you guys exactly how to create a method, and we're going to talk exactly about what it does and how they're useful. So what I want to do in this tutorial is I want to create a method which is going to say hi to the user. So the task of this method is going to be to say hi to whoever is using the program. So what I want to do when I create a new method is I actually want to come down out here outside of these curly brackets. So believe it or not, this line of code up here where it says static void main, this is actually a method inside of our program. So like I said, a method is just a container, or it's sort of like a block where we can put code that's going to perform a specific task. And this main method is very special because this is the method that gets executed when we run our program. So any code that I type down here in this main method gets executed when I run my program. But in addition to writing this main method, we can also define other methods that are going to work a little bit differently, but it's the same idea. We're encapsulating a bunch of code inside of its own little container. So in order to create a new method, I want to first go outside of this main method. So this main method is all the code that I have highlighted. You can see it's delineated with this open and closed curly bracket. So I'm going to come down here below this, and we can actually create a new method. So when I create my method, I need to tell C# a couple different things. And the first thing we need to do is say a keyword static. And I'm actually going to talk a lot more about what static means in later tutorials. And as of right now, it's really not super important as to what this is doing. Again, I will explain what this is, but for now, just know that we have to put static here if we're going to put our method alongside this main method. After I say static, I need to specify something called a return type. Now, these methods are awesome because they can perform specific tasks for us. And one of the things they can do is they can actually give us back information. So if I was to run one of these methods, it can actually give information back to me. And you'll see how to do that. We're going to talk more about return types in the next tutorial. But for now, I'm just going to say void. And that basically means that this method isn't going to return any information. So this is kind of like the simplest method that we can create. All right, so after I say void, I want to give this method a name. Now remember, methods are generally going to be performing a specific task. So you want to name the method based off of the task that it's performing. And that basically more about return types in the next tutorial. But for now, I'm just going to say void. And that basically means that this method isn't going to return any information. So this is kind of like the simplest method that we can create. All right, so after I say void, I want to give this method a name. Now remember, methods are generally going to be performing a specific task. So you want to name the method based off of the task that it's performing. Our method in this tutorial is basically just going to say hi to the user. So I'm just going to call this say hi. And generally in C#, when we're creating a method, we're going to create it using a capital letter for the name. So you can see I named it just like that. You can also see up here, main was named with a capital letter. And that's just a naming convention. That's not necessary, but a lot of people are going to do that. Then what we want to put in here is an open and closed parentheses, and then an open and closed curly bracket over there. And I'm just going to go ahead and indent into this curly bracket. Any code that we put inside of these two curly brackets is going to be considered part of the method. So any code that we put in here will be run when we call our method. So I can essentially write all the code in here to perform the task that the method is designed to carry out. Remember, this method is just going to say hi to the user, so I can basically just print something out onto the screen. I'll say console.writeLine, and why don't we just come over here and say hello user. Our method down here has one line of code, and methods can have as many lines of code as you want. I mean, you could have, I'd say most methods have anywhere from 5 to 10 lines of code, but you can have more or less than that. It doesn't really matter. In my case though, I just have a very simple method, so it's going to be one line of code. All right, so now what I want to do is go ahead and run my program, and we'll see what happens. So I'm just going to click this start button, and you'll see over here, nothing got printed out. So even though we created our new method and we put a line of code inside this method, it didn't execute this line of code. In other words, this line of code never got executed by C#. Here's the reason. When we create a method, this code isn't going to get run automatically. Only the code that's inside of this main method is going to get run when we run our program. So because this code wasn't inside of this main method, it didn't get run. Now, if I want to execute all of the code inside of this say hi function, I can actually do something called calling it. So I can call this method. Basically what that means is C# is going to go over to the method, execute all of the code inside of it. So the way I can call the method is just by typing out its name. I can just say hi, and I can make an open and close parentheses, and then now we should be able to execute this code. So when I run my program now, you'll see we're printing out hello user. So the code inside the method got executed. Now, essentially what's happening is whenever C# sees this line of code, what it does is it jumps over, it goes over to this say hi method, and it's going to go through and execute all of the code inside of there. Then when it's done executing the code inside of here, it's going to come back and it's going to move on to the next line of code in the main method. That's essentially what's happening. So this is extremely useful, and there's going to be a lot of circumstances where you're going to want to have methods that are doing different things, and you're going to want to have all of that code inside of its own single container. But this is really just scratching the surface of what we can do with these methods. And I want to show you guys another thing we can do. We can actually give these methods information. Inside of this say hi function, I could actually specify that this say hi function should take in some information. And this is what we would call parameters or arguments. And a parameter is basically just a value that gets passed into a method. So it's a value that we would give to this method, and then it could use that value to perform its task better or do something. And the way that we can specify a parameter is just by coming in here into the open and close parentheses, and I can just basically specify what type of information I want to accept. So let's say that instead of saying hello user, we wanted this method to say hi to a particular person. Well, over here I could specify string name. And now when I write out this line string name, I'm basically saying that the say hi method needs to take as a parameter, as an argument, one value, which is going to be a name. Then what I can do is I can come down here and I can print out hello name. You'll see we're getting an error up here when we're calling this method. That's because I didn't include a name when I called it. So now whenever I call this method, I have to pass it a string. So I'm going to pass it the string Mike. And essentially what's going to happen is this string Mike that I passed this method is going to get stored inside of this string variable, inside of this name variable, and then I'm just going to print it out. So now we should be printing out hello Mike. And you can see we get that right there. So that's one cool way that we can run these methods. And the other cool thing about methods is that I can call this code as many times as I wanted. So I could call it again and again, and each time pass in a different name. So we'll pass in Mike, John, and Tom. And now each time we call this, the method is going to do something slightly different. So it's going to say hi to someone different. So now it's saying, whoops. Now it's saying hello Mike, hello John, hello Tom. So really what we're doing is we're able to write this code in one place, and then we're able to reuse it continually inside of our program. And that's another reason why methods are awesome. In addition to just passing in one parameter, we could also specify that this should take 2 parameters. So instead of just a name, why don't we also pass in an integer age? And then down here, we can add the age in. So I can say, hello name, you are, and then we'll just print out the age. So now when I call these methods up here, you'll see we're getting more errors because I have to give these values. So I can say like 33, 56, and 12. And now when I run my program, it's going to be able to handle that. So this method is now printing out both the name and the age that we passed in. And really, you can pass anything you want into these methods. You can pass strings, ints, doubles. You can even pass things like arrays. It doesn't really matter. You know, any value that you want to work with, you can pass into here, as long as you can specify it over there. So that's kind of the basics of working with methods. Now, I will say, you'll hear most of the time people are going to call these methods. You'll also hear people refer to these as functions. Methods and functions are essentially the same thing. There is a small difference just in the definition, but generally you can use the word method and the word function interchangeably. And you'll hear a lot of people call these functions. You'll also hear a lot of people call them methods. But generally in C#, like the official term would be a method. So that's really why methods are useful. You can kind of see, you know, we were essentially able to reuse all the code that we wrote down here. So I can reuse it and give it different information and it'll do different things. Now, in the next video, I'm going to talk to you guys about this value over here, which is going to be the return value. So in addition to passing information into methods, methods can also pass information back to the callers, and we're going to talk about that in the next tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to use return statements in C# methods. So in C#, a method is basically just a little block of code which is designed to perform a specific task. And in the last tutorial, I showed you guys how we could create a very simple method that would say hi to the user. In this tutorial, I want to show you guys how we can use another feature of C# methods, which is the return keyword. And basically what we can do is inside of these methods, we can return values back to the callers. So I'm going to show you guys how this works, and we'll kind of get an idea of what this is and what it does. So down here in my program, you'll notice I have my main method over here, and I'm actually going to create another method. So I'm going to come down here below the main method, and I want to create a method which is going to cube a number. So when you cube a number, you basically take it to the third power. So 2 raised to the third power is the same as 2 times 2 times 2, right? So we would say that this is 2 cubed. So what I want to do is actually create a method that will take as a parameter, so take as an argument one number, and then it'll cube it, and it'll actually return that number back to the caller. So this is going to be kind of cool. So remember, whenever we're creating a method, we need to say static. And like I said, I'm going to explain what static is and what it does later in the tutorial. But for now, just know that whenever you're creating a method here next to this main method, because main is such a special method, I'm also going to use this static keyword for the new method that I create. Then the next thing I need to tell C# is going to be the return type. And in the last tutorial, we used this void return type, which basically meant we weren't going to return any information. But now what I want to do is I want to actually specify a particular data type that we're going to return. So in our case, why don't we just say we're going to return an integer. So now what I want to do is give this method a name. So I'm just going to say cube. So it's going to be called cube because it's cubing a number. I'm going to make an open and close parentheses and an open and close curly bracket. Inside of this parentheses, what I want to do is specify a parameter. So this side of this I'm going to make an open and close parentheses and an open and close curly bracket. Inside of this parentheses, what I want to do is specify a parameter. So this cube method is going to take one parameter, and it's going to be an integer, and we're just going to call it num. So num is going to be the number that they pass in, and eventually what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to return to them the value of num cubed. So what I can do down here is I can make an integer, and I'm just going to say int, and we'll call it result. And I want to set result equal to the cubed value of num. In order to get that, we can just say num times num times num. And so now this variable result is going to have num times num times num stored in it. In other words, it's going to have the num cubed stored inside of it. Now, what I want to do is use a special keyword in C# called return. And whenever we put this keyword inside of a method, this is return a piece of information back to the caller. And also this return keyword is going to break us out of the method. So over here, what I can do is I can just say return result. So I'm going to go ahead and return this result variable that we just created back to the caller. Now let's go up here in our main method and actually call this method. So what I want to do is I'm just going to call it, so I'm going to say cube and I'll pass in a number. Let's pass in 5. So now I'm going to go ahead and run my program and we'll see what happens. So you'll see my program ran, but I mean, nothing really happened, right? There was no output, there really, there was no errors, but really nothing happened. Here's the thing though, if I was to come over here and say console.writeLine, if I printed out this method, in other words, if I printed out calling this method, you'll see we're actually going to print out result. We're actually going to print out the value. Over here, I just said console.writeLine, and inside of here, I'm printing out cube 5. Now when I run my program, you'll see we're printing out 125. Basically what happened was when I used this return keyword down here, that returned the something like that. So you can really return any value that you want back from these methods, but returning information can be extremely useful and you're definitely going to want to use it inside of your C# methods. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about if statements in your C#. I'm going to talk to you guys about if statements in C#. Now, an if statement is basically a special structure in our program, which will allow our program to respond to different situations. So essentially with if statements, our programs can become smarter. And I want to show you guys some examples of if statements, and we're going to kind of look at how we can create and use if statements in our programs. Now over here, I have this little text file open, and one of the cool things about if statements is that as human beings, we encounter them every single day. So over here, I have some examples of if statements that you might see on a daily basis. So up here it says, I wake up, if I'm hungry, I eat breakfast. So this is an example of an if statement. Essentially, an if statement has two parts. It has a condition, which is right here, and then it has an action that gets executed when the condition is true. So our condition up here is if I'm hungry. Now this condition is either true or false. It can only have two possible values, true or false. You're either hungry or you're not. If you are hungry, in other words, if this condition is true up here, then you're going to eat breakfast. But if you're not, if this condition's false, then you're just going to move on. And that is the essence of an if statement. We check a condition. If the condition's true, then we'll perform an action. If the condition is false, then we'll move on and we won't perform that action. So just like you're able to make a decision about whether or not you're hungry and whether or not you should eat breakfast, we can use these in our programs to do the same thing, to make decisions. There's another one down here. It says, I look at my phone. If it's about to die, I charge it. So again, this is a condition. It's either true or false. If it's true, if your phone is about to die, then you charge it. Otherwise, we're just going to move on. Here's a little bit of a more complex if statement. It says, I leave my house. If it's cloudy, I bring an umbrella. So again, here's our condition. If it's true, then we're going to bring the umbrella. If it's false though, now we're going to do something else. So up here, when the condition was false, we just moved on. But now, if this condition's false, otherwise we're going to bring our sunglasses. So we're going to do something else. And these are just some basic if statements, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of what these were before we implement them in our programs. So we can do essentially the same thing, but we can allow our programs to make decisions. So when certain conditions are true, we can do certain things, and if they're false, then we can do other things. So let's go back over to our program.c#, and you'll see down here I'm just in my main method, and I'm going to show you guys how we can use some if statements. So before we do any if statements, I'm actually going to create a variable. So this is going to be a Boolean variable, and I'm just going to call it isMale. And this variable is going to tell us whether or not somebody is a male. So I'm a male, so I'm going to set this equal to true. So now we have this Boolean variable isMale, and it has a value of true. Now what I want to do is I want to create an if statement, and we can actually create an if statement based off of this isMale variable. So let's say that we have this variable in our program, we're working with it, and we want to do something when the person is male. So inside of our program, when the person's male, when this variable is true, we want to be able to do something. I can use an if statement to check that. I can come down here and say if, and I'm going to make an open and closed parentheses and an open and closed curly bracket. And this is sort of the general outline of an if statement in our program. Now, inside of this parentheses, I want to specify a condition. So just like over in that text file, we had some conditions like if I'm hungry or if my phone's about to die. Inside of these parentheses, we want to specify a condition. Now, this condition needs to be a true or a false value, right? If I'm hungry, that was our condition before, that's true or false, right? It can only have one of two values. If my phone's about to die is true or false. It can only have one of two values. So inside of this parentheses, we need to put a condition, which is basically just going to be a true or a false value. So in my case, I want to check to see if the person is male. So I can say if is male, and if this variable is true, then we're going to be able to execute the code that we put down here. So why don't we just write out console.writeLine, and we'll just write out you are male. So we're writing out console.writeLine if the variable is male is equal to true. So let's go ahead and run this program, and you'll see over here it's printing out you are male. So our program was smart enough to determine whether or not someone was male. If I was to set this equal to false, and now I went to run my program, when I run the program, you'll notice that nothing is going to get printed out because the variable was false. So this line of code down here only gets executed when this condition up here in these parentheses is true. So that's how we can use a basic if statement. But let's say that when isMale was false, we wanted to do something else. So let's say even if this variable was false, we wanted to try and do something else. Well, I can actually use another keyword in C#, which is called else. So I can say else and open and closed curly bracket. And then down here, we can write out another line of code. So I'm actually just going to copy this guy. And down here, we're going to write out you are not male. So when they are male, we'll tell them that. And when they're not male, when isMale is false, we'll also tell them that. So isMale is false right now, and it should tell us that. So it should tell us you are not male. Essentially what we've done now is we've created a program that is able to respond to the value of a variable. So this program can respond to this variable, right? If isMale is true, then we're going to print out you are male. If isMale is false, then we're going to print out you are not male. So our program is smart. Our program can adapt and adjust what it's doing depending on the value of a variable. And therein lies the essence of if statements. If statements allow our programs to make decisions and to do different things when different conditions are met. But this is a very simple if statement. In fact, this is probably like the simplest if-else statement that we could write. I'm going to make this a little bit more complex, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to create another variable. So I'm going to come up here and make another Boolean, and I'm just going to call it isTall. And this isTall variable, again, is going to store a true or a false value. So why don't we set both of these equal to true just to start off. So this isTall variable is going to tell us whether or not someone is tall. So this will determine if they're like tall or short. And down here, let's say that instead of just checking to see if they are male, we also wanted to check to see if they're tall. So I can say if is male, and I can actually use another operator in C#, and it's called the AND operator. So I can say 2 ampersands like this, and this stands for AND. And basically when we use this AND operator, it allows me to write 2 conditions in the same condition block. So it allows me to not only check to see if they're male, but I could also check to see if they're tall. So now this is saying if is male and is tall. So now not only does is male have to be true, but is tall also has to be true for this whole thing to be true. So if one of these guys was false, then this whole thing would be false. So now down here I could say you are a tall male, right? And then down here, instead of saying you are not male, I could instead say you are either not male or not tall or both, right? Because if this code gets executed, it means one or both of the conditions up here is false. So let me demonstrate this. You'll see over here both of these are set to true, and when I run my program, it's going to be able to respond to that. So you'll see it says you are a tall male because both of those were true. But let's say I set one of these to false. So I set is male equal to false. Well, now because one of these guys is false, this whole thing is going to be false, so we're going to print this out down here. So now when I run the program, you'll see it's printing out you are either not male or not tall or both. So it's able to respond to those 2 variables in our program. In addition to using this AND operator, we can also use another operator which is called OR. And OR does the same thing as AND, except it's a little bit different. So OR will allow us to check 2 conditions, but this time only one of these conditions has to be true for this whole thing to be true. So we would read this as if is male or is tall. So they either have to be male or they have to be tall, or they can be both, and then we'll be able to execute this code right here. But if both of these guys are false, then we're going to go down here and execute this code. So let me just demonstrate this really quick, and I'm not going to bother changing the text here. You guys kind of hopefully get what's going on. So even though false and true are both up here, so even though one of these guys is false, we're still going to be able to print out you are a tall male. But if I was to make both of these false, now we're going to end up printing out you are either not male or not tall or both. Which again, I realize isn't the right text for that, but you can just kind of understand what's going on. So it says you're either not male or not tall or both. So that's the difference between and or. When we use and here, both of these conditions have to be true. So both of these variables would have to be true for this whole thing to be true. And so this could be true. And that's really the difference. We're able to check the conditions in addition to that. Do something when they were male, but they were not tall. So if they're like a short male. I can actually use another keyword or another reserved word in C#, which is called else if. And I can just type out else if like this. I can make an open and close parentheses and an open and close curly bracket. And then I'm just going to make a new line. So essentially what I did here was I added in else if, and then you can see this else basically goes after it. When I use else if, it allows me to check another condition. So if this condition up here is false, I can actually come down here and check another condition. So we wanted to check to see if they were male and they were not tall. So I could say else if is male, and now I need to figure out how I can specify not tall. So remember, this variable is tall will tell us if they're tall or not. If I wanted to find out if they're not tall, I could just say exclamation point is tall. And this is gonna read as not tall, not is tall. This exclamation point here is what's known as the negation operator. And this will basically negate the condition. So over here I have is tall. If this was true, then when I put this exclamation point here, it's gonna make it false. If this was false, when I put this exclamation point here, it's gonna make it true. So this whole thing is gonna be true when the person is not tall. And so now this is essentially checking to see if they're male and they're not tall. So down here we could write another message. So I could basically say like you are a short male because they're male but they're not tall. And finally I'm going to make one more else if. So I'm just going to come down here, and there's one more thing that we want to check. So I also want to check to see if they're tall but they're not male. right? So over here, we're checking if they're male and they're tall. Over here, we're checking to see if they're male and they're not tall. And down here, I want to check to see if they're not male and they are tall. So this is saying else if not male and is tall. So down here, we can put another little message, and I'm just going to basically say, like, you are not a male, but you are tall. So this is essentially just saying exactly what it is. You're not male, but you are tall. And then down here for this else, remember, this code now is only going to get executed when none of these conditions up here are true. So now down here, we can just say you are not male and not tall. All right, so let me walk you guys through this one more time. Up here, I'm saying if is male and is tall. So this condition is only going to be true when both of these are true. And then if this is true, we're going to come down here and execute this code. We're going to say you are a tall male. But if this is false, we're going to come down here to this else if, and we're going to check another condition. So only when this is false are we going to check this condition down here. And we're basically going to check to see if they're male and they're not tall. And I'm using this negation operator here. And if that's true, then we're going to tell them that. We're going to print that out. Then we're going to check to see if they're not male and they're tall, and we'll print out a message for that. And then finally, we'll say you are not male and not tall. So let's go ahead and run our program, and you'll see both of these guys are going to be set to true initially. And we'll try all these different combinations. So both of them are set to true. I'm going to run the program, and it says you are a tall male. So our program was smart enough to be able to respond to the value of these two variables. So now let's set is male equal to false. So I'm going to come down here and we'll just say false. And now essentially this is going to be able to respond. So I can run my program now, and you'll see it's printing out you are not male, but you are tall. So it was able to respond to that different value. Now we'll set is male back equal to true, and we'll set is tall equal to false. And now we should get a appropriate response. So it says you are a short male. And finally, if these are both equal to false, then again, the program's going to be able to respond to that. So it's going to say you are not male and not tall. Awesome. So essentially what we did with these if statements was we allowed our program to respond to different values, right? Our program was able to make decisions based off the information that it was given. And this is really just scratching the surface of if statements. You'll see over here we're using these Boolean variables, right? But there's actually another way that we can specify these conditions, and it's using something called comparisons. And in the next tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys all about comparisons, about how to use them, and it's basically just another way that these if statements can come in handy.
We have to see that because it's connected.
In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys some more about if statements. More specifically, we're going to be talking about comparisons. So inside of an if statement, we can actually compare two values, and depending on the result of the comparison, we can do different things. This is going to be kind of cool. And essentially what I want to do in this tutorial is I want to build a method. And this method is basically going to be a max method. So the max method, if you're not familiar, is basically a method where we can give it two numbers and it'll tell us which one is bigger. So we're going to write a method that takes two parameters as input, num1 and num2, and then we'll basically be able to return whichever is bigger. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to go below this main method, and we're going to create another method. So I'm just going to say static. And I'm going to want this to return an integer. So why don't we just say that it's going to return an integer, and I'm going to call it get max. And then I'm going to make an open and close parentheses and an open and close curly bracket. So get max is going to take one or two parameters. So we're going to take an integer num1, and then we're also going to take another integer num2. Basically, the job of this method is to figure out which of these two numbers is bigger and then return it to the caller. So let's go ahead and set this up. I'm actually going to create a variable. So I'm just going to make an integer. I'll call it result. And I'm not actually going to give this a value yet. So we're going to end up giving this a value inside of the method. And then down here, I'm going to return result. So I'm just going to return this variable. And inside of this method now, our goal is to figure out which number is bigger, right? So inside of this method, we don't know if num1 is bigger or num2 is bigger. We have no idea. right? All we know is that we have two numbers here that we can work with. So what we want to do is use an if statement, and an if statement will allow us to do something when a certain condition is true and do something else when a certain condition is false. So I'm going to make an if statement. I'm just going to say if, and I'm going to make an open and close parentheses and an open and close curly bracket. So this is like the sort of outline, the structure for our if statement. Now, inside of these parentheses, I need to put a condition. And remember, a condition is a true or a false value. In the previous tutorial, we were using booleans as our conditions. So I had a boolean like is male and another one is tall, and we used that as the conditions for our if statements. But here's the thing, we don't necessarily have any booleans to work with, right? All we can work with here are these two integers. So what I can do is I can actually use something called a comparison. So I can compare the two numbers. So I could actually say like if num1 is greater than num2. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm comparing the two values. But remember, inside of these parentheses, we need a condition. We need a true or a false value. But actually the cool thing is that when we do this comparison, this is going to resolve down to a true or a false value. Right, so num1 is either going to be greater than num2 or it's not. There's only two possible scenarios with this comparison, right? Either it's true and num1 is greater than num2, or it's false and num2 is greater than or equal to num1, right? So really this gets resolved down to a true or a false value anyway. So these comparisons can be super useful inside of our parentheses. Now, inside of this actual if block, if num1 is indeed greater than num2, then we can just set result equal to num1. And then I'm going to make an else statement down here, and I'll just say else, and I'm just going to say result is equal to num2. So if num1 is greater than num2, then we'll make result num1, otherwise we'll make it num2. And then down here, we're just returning result. So this method is basically done. We have everything that we need. We should be able to figure out which number is bigger. So let's go back up here to our main method, and I'm going to call this. And I'm actually going to print out the answer. So I'm just going to say console.writeLine, and then inside of these parentheses, we're going to call it. So I'll just say get max. And why don't we pass this 2 and 10. So ideally, we're going to get a 10 back because 10 is the bigger number. So let's go ahead and run this program, and you'll see we're getting that 10 back, no problem. So let's now see if it's going to work when the first number is the bigger one, and hopefully it does, so we should get 20, which we do. So this method is working out, and you can see we were able to use this comparison in order to figure it out. So that's awesome, and this is pretty cool, but I'm going to get rid of this. Let's up the ante a little bit. Let's make this a little bit more difficult. Let's say instead of 2 numbers, we wanted to be able to compare 3 numbers. So we wanted this max function to be able to tell us the maximum of 3 separate numbers. Well, in here I can just specify another parameter, so I can say num3. And now down here, not only do we have to figure out 2 of them, but we have to figure out 3 of them. So of these 3 numbers,
before he tells us what can we do, simple. The most simplest way would be to like compare 2 comparisons, right, in the 3 numbers, or else if this. Nah, it's confusing. I don't know. Wait, let me figure it out. 3 numbers. We need to compare all of them. So if num1 is greater than num2, right? But then get it to check another condition if the number 1 is also greater than number 3 or not. Something like that. I don't know.
Which one is bigger? Now, we're going to want to use another if statement. So I'm going to go ahead and this time I'll make that same if statement essentially. And now we need a condition. So not only do we need to check to see if num1 is greater than num2, but we also have to check to see if it's greater than num3. So I'm going to say if num1 is greater than or equal to num2, And so I'm using this and operator, num1 is greater than or equal to num3. Then down here, we can set result equal to num1, because
That's how you
if
do it.
num1's bigger than num2 and it's also bigger than num3, then we know
Spiro.
it's the biggest one, right? So we can just go ahead and return that. But let's say that this isn't the case. I want to do another one, so I'm going to say else if, and we'll make another condition down here. So I'm basically just going to say else if num2 is greater than or equal to num1 and num2 is greater than or equal to num3. Right, so if num2 is bigger than num1 and it's bigger than num3, then num2 is the biggest. So we'll say result is equal to num2. Finally, then we can just say else, and down here we can specify the else. So I'm just going to go ahead and set result equal to num3. Because if num1's not the biggest, and remember we checked that up here, and num2's not the biggest, which we checked down here, then num3 is going to be the biggest. So let's go ahead and test this out. So now we need to include another number. So I'm going to put like a 4 in here. So we should get back this 20 because that's the biggest number. And you can see we do. Let's try it with the other places. So let's make this last one here. We'll make this a 40. So this is going to be the biggest.
Hey
And let's see
DIO,
if this works.
how have
which
you
it
been?
does. So
Welcome
this
back.
get max method seems to be working out pretty well.
जाओ,
Now,
घर
down
पे
here you'll notice
गुजरात
when
आ
I
जाओ,
compare the
लेते
two
पार्टी।
numbers, I'm using these like greater than or equal to's, or before I just use a greater than. These are called comparison
How was your day?
operators. And these comparison operators can be used to compare different values. So I can use greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. I can also use equal to, and this double equals is special because it's going to allow us to compare these two numbers. So this isn't used for assignment. Like down here, we used a single equals for assignment. So I assigned the value of num1 to result. Up here, I'm comparing the value. So
I
I'm
did get it.
basically
I mean, ज़रा भी नहीं दिख रहे, not even on Discord, not even on stream, so I sort of figured exam studies, something like that.
assignment. Like down here, we used a single equals for assignment. So I assigned the value of num1 to result. Up here, I'm comparing the value. So I'm basically checking to see if the value of num1 is equivalent or equal
That's
to
more
the value
important
of
in the long run.
num2. And then we can also use one more, which is going to be not equals. And this is going to be the
Dio
opposite.
said so
So this
now
will
you
say
OD a smiley
num1
face
not
party win.
मैं तो अभी वही कह रहा है. You'll have to give me a visit. I'll surely give you a nice treat.
equal to num2. So that's essentially this two or equal. Now, so make this a 4. Get max method seems to be working out pretty well. Now, down here you'll notice when I compared the two
Dio
numbers,
said
I'm
online
using these
payment
like greater
accept
than or
card of
equal
who
to, or
main.
before
हाँ, लेकिन जो तुम्हें यहाँ बुलाना है उसका क्या?
I just use a greater than. These are called comparison operators. And these comparison operators can be used to compare different values. So I can use greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. I can also use equal to, and this double equals is
bhai.
special because it's going to allow us to compare these two numbers.
यहाँ पे
So
देखने के
this
लिए
isn't
अलग-अलग
used for
तो है.
assignment. Like down here, we used a single equals for assignment. So I
it's all
assigned
right.
the value of num1 to result. Up here, I'm comparing the value. So I'm basically checking to see if the value of num1 is equivalent or equal to the value of num2. And then we can also use one more, which is going to be not equals. And this is going to be the opposite. So this will say num1 not equal to num2. So that's essentially how we can use comparisons. And you can also, in addition to numbers, you could also compare like characters. So I could compare like two characters, basically like that. And that's going to work out just fine. So these comparisons are extremely useful. And I would say that a lot of times when you're using if statements, you're going to be using comparisons just like that.
That is enough for today. 2 hours of content. But let's try to build that. Okay, build. So yeah. I guess now you will be able to see it properly. I hope so it's zoomed in. It is zoomed in. That is nice. So he used like numbers, right? Um, First of all, let me take this out. That is gone. I have to assign three numbers. Like there's a static void, right? And he was using get max. And how would I use it? Static space get max. I won't be speaking because I'm not wearing my headphones right now. These are the IEM ones. So yeah.
Dio said, why you learning C hash out of blue though?
It's because I'm stuck at the code of streamer bot, that there's a user variable uh, which gets a list of the present viewers, which allows you to give delicate and detailed information of who's watching the stream live. Whereas for YouTube, it's like they don't give you that information. So streamer bot has to just see the active chatters who are in the the chat section, and it checks for them every 5 minutes that are they present in the live chat or not. So on YouTube sites, it's pretty difficult. After changing all the variable names logically, like I don't know how to code, right? So the easiest way for me to convert a Twitch command to YouTube is to convert all the variable names, the Twitch code, and add a suffix name YT in all the variables. So that way it can run on YouTube, right? I did that, but according to the documentation present on the streamerbot site, uh, they have various C# methods to execute stuff and extract the information. So there is like get YouTube users variable, and it's something in a particular language. Like if I want to get the information out of the present viewers, so it's like the variable which gets assigned to it is users in plural form, and the type and its type is list, angle mark less than, then string, question mark, space object, then double angled brackets greater than wale. So now I'm like confused because it is not able to get the information out of it. It's saying that it's inexplicit or specify a type, and that various compiling errors, you can say, and it is occurring in the else statement itself. So I'm not able to like extract out the information of the actual present viewers. And this command is related to hugs, that people can hug each other in chats. So like they can ask for a hug from another person, and if they consent to it, then they can hug each other, and there are also leaderboards for that. Yes, like someone has made that for Twitch, and it works. I wanted to make it for YouTube, so that is where I'm stuck actually. See, I'll show you what I mean in just a second. Your eyes will be boom though by watching this. this is the code, right? So there's this compile error that type arguments for the method cph get YouTube users variable string and boolean cannot be inferred from the usage.
Written.
Try specifying the argument specifically, I mean explicitly. And this is the line I'm talking about. List, dictionary, present viewers, and stuff like that. So I'm really confused on that part actually. Wait, it's not appearing. Just a second. It would not appear right now. Never mind. So I mean that's the reason actually why I'm trying to learn this stuff. So like there's that. And I also like to, just when I did the stuff analytically by myself, remember that duels YT I made where you can shoot each other like in a cowboy style. Like it's like a competition type of stuff. So what I did was all the sources which have to be, opened up, like showed up, and then you have to hide them at specific intervals. So like a streamer bot gives you, it's like a GUI, right, for the C# methods. So I went to the documentation site and I integrated that into the C# code itself. So whenever the game goes on in the chat, and according to the result, it would initiate that sort of animation or that sort of file and its movement via filter. So like that was, I was very proud of that. That was really very simple, but still I was able to give it a graphical representation instead of just putting it in the chat itself. So like whenever you shoot, so then a shooting sound would go, and after that there would be a decision that who lost, and the person who lost, they would get what do you say, blood out of them, and they would get transported by a portal somewhere else. So like that is what I did. So yeah, I was very like proud of it. It was very simple, like nothing too special. It was like just following this stuff, but we cannot ban them. The thing is internet सबका सही से नहीं चलता, so latency issues, so it sort of favors the one with the lower ping. So basically I went into C# and see, this is what it shows actually, like get a YouTube users variable and stuff, this one. So what's happening is that let me change it to this. Now you can see it over here too. So the thing is this is what I have to use, this one, this top one right now, right? So like this is a method signature. I don't know what is a method signature, terminology wise, मुझे कोडिंग नहीं आती. तो अब इसमें चीज़ ये है कि अब ये सब मुझे समझना हो तो थोड़ा स्टार्टिंग से बेसिक C# तो समझना पड़ेगा कि भाई चल क्या रहा है. कि ऐसे इन जनरल आइडिया आ गया था मुझे कोड को देख के कि लाइक ट्रायल एंड एरर करके कि हाँ भाई इससे ये चल रहा है, इससे वो हो रहा है, और जैसे जैसे एरर फिक्सअप होती जाती है वैसे वैसे आइडिया आता कि वो इसका स्ट्रक्चर ऐसे चलता है. तो इसमें कैसा है कि लाइक this gives you all the information actually regarding the person in the hug section. तो जो errors जो आ रही है ना, error वो else वाले कंपार्टमेंट में आ रही है. कंपार्टमेंट भी नहीं कह सकते, टर्मिनोलॉजी भी होगी उसकी अलग से। जो एल्स का जो सेक्शन है तो उसमें इट्स नॉट एबल टू डिटेक्ट कि भाई वो कह रहा है कि भाई कोई भी उसको मिल नहीं रहा। और उसके अलावा जो मैं कह रहा था प्रेजेंट व्यूअर्स की जो एक लिस्ट होती है तो उसके हिसाब से प्रेजेंट व्यूअर्स राइट। तो उसके अंदर उन्होंने यहाँ का टाइप दिया है कि जिसकी इज लाइव इज अ बूलियन ऑपरेटर आई गेस, पता नहीं। तो इट कैन बी ट्रू और फॉल्स। तो उसी वे में देयर इज दिस यूजर्स और उसका टाइप कि लिस्ट एंगल्ड ब्रैकेट्स एंड देन डिक्शनरी string and object. Oh, oh, अब थोड़ा क्लिक हुआ। सो बेसिकली स्ट्रिंग में मैं सिर्फ 3 ही चीज़ें ले सकता हूँ वहाँ से उनके पास से, राइट। इट इज दिस डिस्प्ले, यूजर नेम एंड आईडी। आई गेस आई कैन ओनली एक्सट्रैक्ट these 3 and boolean में I can only write if it's true or false. But स्टिल एक इश्यू तो है। वेट, थिंग इस पे उसके आगे का कोड थोड़ा वैसे टाइप का है। थोड़ी देर में आते हो तो फिर मैं शायद एपेक्स खेलूंगा। डू यू हैव एपेक्स लेजेंड्स इंस्टॉल्ड? डीओ शायद होगी, शायद ही, आई गेस। चलो आइडिया आया मुझे करना क्या है, थोड़ा तो आइडिया लगा कि भाई क्या है मतलब इसका। आई हैव टू रिप्लेस बोथ ऑफ देम। बट ऑब्जेक्ट में क्या आएगा तो फिर? डिक्शनरी तो आ गई बट व्हाट अबाउट ऑब्जेक्ट उसके टाइप में? दैट इज समथिंग आई डोंट नो अबाउट। I'm really confused on that part. Like for the new subscriber, you can also check this stuff out. What to do and what not to do. Well, let's end the stream. Building a better calculator, switch statements, while loops, for loops, exponent, arrays, comments, exception handling, classes and objects, constructors, object methods, getters, setters, static class attributes, methods, classes, inheritance. Just a second. I need to fix the screen. Now it is good. Better. And in the same way, I have to do it for this too. Stretch to bounds 1094 and copy this and paste it, and I think we're good to go. Pro Shifty, yep, working pretty nicely. Nice. Well, let's close the stream now. Let's give you guys the credits whatsoever arrived tonight. So yeah. Thanks, Edibot. Thanks, Lucky Siddharth, editing and Dio for joining the stream. I'll see you guys soon, like very soon. So, tada.